Time collecting sound.
Okay, we are live. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Saturday Free School. I'll try to not introduce today's discussion, but we're going to talk about two recent interviews with Gerald Horne and Cornel West. And the talk is going to begin the discussion.
Okay, thanks a lot. I entitled this Cornel West, Gerald Horne, and the Problem of Knowledge in Politics. Each of them, like myself, emerges from the post-World War II reality of America and the world, and ultimately we emerge from the Third American Revolution. I want to explain how that would impact each of us. In terms of Gerald and Cornel, each of them emerges in the 1980s as public intellectuals, as people with huge brains and unbelievable memories. It seems, I know that Cornel has something like a photographic memory, and I think Gerald does also, but they use their brains differently. Which is an interesting question, how the brain is a physical, a biological thing, but then it grows and is shaped by ideology and experience. But these two people with huge brains and are public intellectuals. Cornel emerges as a public intellectual in the 1980s, right at the time that African American studies is becoming a discipline throughout most of the academy. And of course, Cornell emerges in this group that is sponsored by Harvard University. And it was Harvard's answer to the more militant trends of Black studies that come out of the 1970s. But in the same period, Gerald was pretty much pursuing an academic career and tenure. Again, out the gate, Cornel brands himself, and not wrongly, as a public intellectual. He will speak to the public. This approach goes back to the pragmatist school, in particular John Dewey, and then ultimately for Cornell, his mentor at Princeton, Richard Rorty. Who becomes a kind of a father, what we call neo-pragmatism. But here is the point: to understand Cornel, you have to understand his philosophy of pragmatism, which is the American answer to continental European rationalism, such as Kant or Hegel. And so what the American pragmatists, especially John Dewey, the most famous of all American pragmatists, argued was that we need a philosophy of ordinary people. Cornel, you will often hear him citing Sly and the Family Stone. I am everyday people, or citing Curtis Mayfield, or other, in rhythm and blues, and he is a heavy rhythm and blues man. Other people in rhythm and blues of the period of the 60s and 70s that reference the people. So Cornel feels that to do philosophy, you must do it in connection with ordinary people. And that's a hugely positive thing. So for him, it is not unusual as a public intellectual to do what he does and to do it the way he does it. He's not just performing something that doesn't fit him. He's doing something that fits him perfectly, given his philosophy. Cornell is more than anything else an ethicist. He is not a Kantian at all, i.e. the moral imperative. He is an ethicist. What is ethical? We might say what is moral.
Yeah.
He would say what is ethical. But that fits into Richard Rorty's notion of neo-pragmatism. I just want to say one more small thing about Richard Rorty. Was very progressive. His last book was entitled Achieving Our Nation. Achieving Our Country, which is a quote from Baldwin. And in that book, Rorty, who had lived most of his time as an academic at Princeton University, had argued that the intelligentsia had abandoned the working class for the academy. And it seems that Cornell is saying, as a child of the Second or Third American Revolution, I have a duty to speak to the people and to speak with the people. And if you notice, even in these interviews, and we'll return to them, how generous Cornell is. He does not hide from critique. He wants his ideas to be heard and to be critiqued. I want to say something else about Cornell in a minute. But his being at Harvard said that he had the approval of top elements of the ruling elites who needed high profile, at that time in the 80s, high profile Black intellectuals who could speak in ways that perhaps raised race as a question of American society, but did not connect it to capitalism and to the overturning of racism and capitalism. I'll just put it like that for the time being. I think to understand this, you have to realize that by the 1980s, it had only been 12 years since King was assassinated. This is hugely important because the shadow of that remained over all of us, and probably still does, but certainly those of us who lived through or were kids during the civil rights movement. We just couldn't forget it. And so the ruling class had to get out in front of all of this because, they know what we know, that the Black community, the Black struggle represents a cauldron of resistance. And ideologically, how Black people go will affect how the nation goes. We could say a lot about that. And frankly, as MAGA begins to break up, they will scatter. And I would not be surprised if major parts of them who are public intellectuals and thought leaders in the MAGA movement don't find their way to the Black tradition. I don't think Nick Fuentes will, but I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is a more genuine person. There are probably thousands of others like her. But the ruling class at that time had to get out in front of all of this. I wrote a couple of articles, one called A Short History of Propaganda, and another called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, something like that, I forget. But in each of them, and this is in the 90s maybe, I guess, to show how these two camps or multiple camps in Black studies were emerging, congealing, and so on and so forth. I don't think you guys can recall, I know you can't, but the whole thing where the intelligentsia who were once could never be satisfied with a degree or university job, now were craving it. You know, there's a change in positionality, but a change in character. So, you know, Cornell will talk about his parents who were working class Black people, his growing up influenced by the Black Panther Party, California, I think Sacramento, where he's from, and so on. Gerald Horne is a completely different story, even as he has evolved. And for each of them, I think it is worth studying how they have evolved, not just intellectually, but also psychologically. The other thing, I mentioned these people with these huge brains, and it's really something to observe. But each of them is important in the intellectual and ideological history of Black people from the 50s going forward. If one is to study the intellectual history of Black folk, the ideological history of Black folk, part of what we would study are people like Cornell and Gerald. Gerald traverses a different universe from Cornell. Cornell is a prodigy. He's a champion track runner in California. I think he set records. And he was obviously quite precocious. He goes to Harvard. Well, at that time, Harvard was trying to recruit Black people because the ruling class needed Harvard-trained, Harvard-socialized Black men and women who would speak like Harvard speaks, you know, which is then a rupture of the tradition of all of the most important Black thinkers and activists went to historically Black colleges and universities. I mean, I've said this to you before. If a person, let's say a young man came to Lincoln from Harvard, you know, the first thing we would say to him, you need to shut up. You nothing. You know, we would degrade. And it wasn't that we would just try to perform. We believe that you went to Harvard, you with the white man. Is that what you're telling me? Don't think you all that. Now, that's the way we would talk. But all of us, we went to historically Black colleges. And here, as a result of the Third American Revolution, these elite places are opening up to Blacks because the ruling class knows that that the ruling class and its representatives have to look differently to the American people, to Black people, and to Africa and the rest of the anti-colonial world. So these Harvard graduates and Yale and Princeton and I don't know where else graduates turn out to be mainly apologists for the ruling elite. Cornell kind of veered from that. He was a part of this group that the New York Times, I think, called the Dream Team. I think that's what they called the Chicago Bulls basketball team at one point. The Dream Team, and that was Henry Louis Gates, Cornell. They were the top two people. Then William Julius Wilson, sociologist, Elizabeth Higginbotham, historian and legal scholar, and maybe one other, I can't remember.
Kwame
Anthony Appiah, I think he was a part of that, yes, the philosopher, the African-British philosopher. Gerald Horne graduated graduates as an undergraduate from Princeton University. He's from Missouri, I think, St. Louis. I meet Gerald Horne in the 70s, and we're both members of the Communist Party. And it is his experience with the left that in some ways explains the way he talks today. Throughout much of the 80s and 90s, as I said, his academic writings tended to be highly specialized and almost a niche kind of thing. He would write on topics that would be very specific, researchable. In other words, you can go to an archive and, go through it. And some people are built like this, where he's one of those guys that can spend time in an archive, where most of us don't like to spend time in a library. He can do it in an archive. And that, his research tends to be archival. I want to talk about that method. It'll explain a lot. At first he was defined as a historian of the Black left. And so he wrote biographies of William L. Patterson, Ben Davis, even Shirley Graham Du Bois, and of Du Bois, which wasn't really a biography. I'll tell you about that. It was a study of Du Bois in the time of the Cold War. But his writings were very specialized. But unlike Cornell, if you were to ask me, Gerald is not broadly and widely educated. When it comes to doing research, he's a workaholic. He can just shut out everything and just, focus. But he's not a broadly situated intellectual. He fits the mold of a certain type of academic who is a specialist. As we get further into this, one of the things, and I know Alice has talked about how difficult it is for her to get a hold on what Cornell is saying. But with Gerald, it is an intellectual or researcher, an academic that focuses on specific things and is highly specialized in every field. I know in the fields of physics or chemistry or biology, you have people that operate in these very small research agendas. And they tend to have personalities that you don't want to be around too much, but they act like they're autistic something, because all they do is what you call
idiot savants.
Idiot savants. All they do is focus on one thing. So Gerald kind of adopts this positivist approach. And he survived the upsurge of postmodernism, which claimed in the public to be taking on huge and major questions of civilization and society. In contrast to Gerald, you have Cornell. He's a philosopher, but he's interdisciplinary. So he links philosophy, theology, ethics, literature, and culture to create a specific kind of narrative space. At the same time, and Cornell is very well read in some respects. When it comes to Du Bois, I would have to give him a C. I would. and by the way, in the mid to late 1990s, Cornell was very anti-Du Bois, very anti-Du Bois. But nonetheless, he speaks from broad learning, which is positive. He deploys his whole intellectual capacity to addressing certain questions. Whether or not this mind has been deployed to find solutions to these problems is another question. Again, when you listen to Horne, you're listening to a very narrow, specialized mind. I have never heard him reference philosophy, literature, or sociology. Again, if there is a philosophical camp that I would place Horne in, it would be as a British empiricist. Whereas Cornell references, in particular, the wide body of European rationalism, Russian literature, Russian novelists, especially Chekhov. But he knows the European or continental European rationalists like Kant, like Hegel, and others. Gerald Horne, as I said, does not even reference philosophy, but when you look at his method, it is empiricist, it's British. Really, we don't have to go all into this unless you ask me, the work of David Hume. The idea that we can only know what we experience through our senses. Okay? Now, what do we do with that data? Well, the philosopher or the social scientist or the historian will then connect based upon the culture of that time, would connect the dots through a narrative. A narrative. So the narrative comes external to the data. Okay? Horne precisely does that. Collects data after data after data, and then imposes a narrative structure on it.
Okay.
Now, in many instances, the narrative structure is filled with mistakes, which suggest even that the data that he presents might be filled with errors. And I think we have discussed the various critiques of the Counter-Revolution book. But Gerald rose to a prominence I don't think he could have ever wished for when his Counter-Revolution of 1776 thesis was adopted by the New York Times in the 1619 Project. And Hannah Nicole Jones, who is the author of, when I say the author of it, she's a journalist at the New York Times. She pulled together a number of essays supporting the claim that the U.S. state, and I'm not clear whether they're talking about the U.S. nation or the U.S. state, let's say the nation state, was formed in 1619 when the first African slave was brought here, and not 1776 with the revolution. Okay? And therefore, if you start with 1619, according to Nicole Hannah Jones and Gerald Horne, what you see is a history that is genocide against Native people and enslavement of Africans. Okay. So 1776 was an episode in the consolidation of a society based on slavery And secondly, a counter-revolution, which then opens the nation up to settlers from Europe who will constitute a colonial settler state. So when you look at Gerald Horne's thesis, the nation in its beginnings up till today has been nothing other than counter-revolutionary, and fascism was built into the DNA of the American system and the American people. Now, as you might well imagine, this thesis that the American Revolution was a counter-revolution was met with a lot of critique and criticism. And then there were reviews that showed that Gerald made every kind of mistake in his the use of the Somerset case and other things. I forget all of them now. But it was filled with error. And his response was to not respond and say that the people who were criticizing him were white supremacists and representatives of the US settler state. That the left he is particularly angry with for not embracing his thesis, because he says that this shows that the left is the left wing of a settler population. By settler, we mean completely reactionary. Henry Winston would refer to Horne's approach as a skin strategy, which might explain why Horne, writing biographies of Ben Davis and William L. Patterson, never wrote one of Winston. There's something about Winston that doesn't sit well with Gerald. So, and I'm setting this up because I think it'll help to make sense of him when you listen, especially these days. He is filled with pessimism and anger and how would you say, cynicism, a cynical laugh coming from I don't know where at times. But I see it as a deterioration of his personality and of his stability. And he seems to be fighting to uphold his position on settler colonialism and the counter-revolution of 1776. He's fighting to defend that position. And frankly, I don't think he has many allies, and hardly any in the historical profession, black, white, or otherwise. It's such an untenable thesis. And he even at one point in a interview referred to the Civil War as that bloodletting. Civil War, is that all you saw, bloodletting? But yes, that is all he wants to see. Because the question, if the Civil War is a revolution that changed the nature of property, land, and other relationships, then it is more than just a bloodletting. Its essence was revolutionary, and and that Reconstruction was a revolutionary period, and that the defeat of Reconstruction was a counter-revolution. Does that make sense? But he can't, his narrative does not permit of that if the whole history is counter-revolutionary. Does that make sense? I think that Horne has become substance, and anti-revolutionary. The thing that he fears most, I think, is that his theory of this vast white population as reactionary settlers on the level of the South African white population or the Rhodesian white population. That's where he makes a comparison. Furthermore, he says that how could the United States be anything other than a counter-revolutionary country when it's founded upon the genocide of Native Americans and the enslavement of Africans? Well, maybe it can. First of all, this is not the first instance of populations displacing other populations. And not just in Europe or Asia, but much of the history of empires in Africa, including the Zulu Empire in Southern Africa, was based upon war and the displacement of more ancient populations that had occupied that land, displacing them with Zulu farmers, taking their land and so on. This is not unusual. Populations, the world has not been populated by all of us staying where we were born. And often the most successful, quote, successful societies were those who could occupy the land and the labor of other societies and exploit them. This is why, in some ways, participating in the transatlantic slave trade by certain African tribes was not they didn't have to have a second thought. Because this had gone on in Africa. It had gone on in every part of the world. This was not unique, okay? And this is why we want to get to logical questions at another point here. What is the epistemology or logical approach that leads to that tunnel vision? And thus we could say that Horne's approach is essentialist. In other words, if you discover the essence of a thing, you know it and will know it forever. Well, that's empiricist, but that's also Aristotle. There is no growth and development. Okay, I want to talk about how he got there. However, to understand their current positions, you have to understand their positions on three distinct moments in American and world history. The first, and that goes for myself and them, that in a sense I can know them because I can know myself in this regard. The first is the civil rights or Third American Revolution. It's not about where you would have stood back then, but where you stand on that moment now. You know, a lot of people can celebrate and praise King or Abernathy, Coretta, Diane Nash, and all of these people as heroes of a revolutionary movement. But they see outside of a very narrow legal achievement, the civil rights movement as not a radical movement. So when Jotish, as they say, my man Pots and Pans, clown from downtown, yeah, I'm sorry, I have to go to North Philly once in a while. Anyway, Jotish, who was a graduate student at the University of Chicago in political science, Jotish is an Indian immigrant. He's just been over here about 2 or 3 years, and suddenly he's going to be a gatekeeper on the Black radical tradition. And when it comes to Black people, he don't know his behind from a hole in the ground, and he's too ignorant and too arrogant. But he's interviewed both Cornell and Gerald. He's interviewed Gerald twice, and they just seem to be a little bit too much for him. He doesn't know enough. He doesn't know the right questions to ask. But it's not because he can't learn what the right, there's such a thing called the free school. He was at one of our events in Chicago, but you know how that goes. I won't say any more about that. But the Third American Revolution, what is your position on that? Now, when Gerald and Cornell are interviewed, Gerald doesn't, I've never heard him mention King. He talks about the Black left as though it was something separate from the Black movement. In ways I can tell you, Winston and Patterson and them would never speak of the Black left in that way. As you would see this performance, you see it with people like Margaret Kimberly, Ajamu Barak and others, where the performance is that to be left, I have to be way outside of anything that would be considered mainstream or mainstream Black. Because we're the left, we're the extreme, we're the ones that are way out there. But so which suggests to me that Gerald is already, like he dismissed the Civil War and Reconstruction, and by the way, Du Bois's book, Black Reconstruction in America, like he dismisses them and the possibility of revolutionary change in this country, he dismisses the civil rights movement and the Third American Revolution. Once you go there, you set a trajectory in place logically. And here I'm speaking about Aristotle's logic, linear logic. Logically, you're locked in to a certain path, a certain set of assumptions and beliefs. If the civil rights movement was not the radical dream we hoped for, or the radical movement we hoped for, then where was it? Oh, it was, some people say, oh, it was the Black Power movement. It was the Black Panther Party. Well, neither of them had the breadth or quality of leadership that the civil rights movement had, and none of them had the social base, i.e. the Black church and Black labor, that the civil rights movement had. None of it. Horne will then say that the Black left was destroyed in the period of McCarthyism, and what was left after that was wiped up in the 70s and so on, with the killings of Panthers and such. The second is the collapse of the world communist movement in the Soviet Union. This is highly important for each of these figures because Gerald was in the Communist Party. Not a person of any consequence in it, I'll tell you. He was seen as what he was as a historian specializing in certain narrow topics. But the collapse of the world communist movement was a shock to Horne, because his whole theory of the world revolutionary process was that of the three currents, world socialism and the anti-colonial struggles would constitute the anchorage. Okay? That no matter what happened here, there was a world beyond this nation that could be determinative. Well, most of us thought like that as well. The only question is when this, which we never expected, with the collapse of the world communist movement in the Soviet Union, question what is now to be done. What Horne concludes is that what is to be done is a retreat on all of the significant questions of the left, but really of the broad Black movement. And he says these were all wrong because we did not critically understand American history. We did not understand that rather than a democratic revolution, it was a counter-revolution. Rather than a democratic state, a settler colonial regime was established. Okay. On that basis, there could never have been an anti-slavery struggle. There could never have been a Frederick Douglass. There could never have been a Third American Revolution. There could never have been a Martin Luther King. Now, if you make, and I say this all the time about Gerald, if you're going to make this claim, then let's go through all of the implications of the claim, which would be necessary to do in a public setting, which he refuses to do. Okay? That might have something to do with a kind of psychological fragility and inability to deal with debate and discourse. For Cornel West, who was at this time and had been since the early 1980s a member of Democratic Socialists of America, for Cornell and Manning Marable and a number of other Black social democrats, this was a confirmation of what they had been saying. We are not communists, we are socialists, in fact, we're democratic socialists because we reject, the authoritarianism of communism and the Stalinism, these are all quotes, of the Soviet regime. In other words, I think they had swallowed hook, line, and sinker the ruling class Cold War narrative. So they celebrated it. And I can tell you just personally, I wasn't happy no kind of way. And in fact, some of the things that I wrote about that period were an attempt to reflect on where they had gone. Now, I've talked so much about this to you all, but, for instance, Angela Davis was probably the best known figure in the history of the left in this country, flips away from communism, away from revolutionary struggle, and becomes a social democrat and a liberal. Not unlike Mamdani, And the third factor in the development of the two people we're talking about is the election of Donald Trump in 2016 and then the re-election in 2024. For Horne, this is but confirmation, as he puts it today, that we're in the throes of an emerging fascism. Cornell would use other language more sweeping, that we live in a neo-fascist regime. But each of them believes that fascism is what we are faced with or what we are living with. There's just some other questions that, of course, we're going to talk about their approach to the election in the last couple of weeks ago. Horne is the ultimate pessimist. There are no possibilities of democratic struggle because blacks a minority and whites the majority are settlers, and they have the mentality of a settler colonial population. If one were to ask, what is the history of consciousness in this country? What is the history of white people's consciousness in this country? What is the history of black people's consciousness in this? Well, those are not research questions that concern Horne. Because for him, there is not the presence of any significant agents of revolutionary change. The way we talk about a black proletariat and try to understand a history of consciousness flowing from that historically constituted reality. Well, for Horne, that doesn't even exist. And, I find it, when I listen to him, I find it shocking. You know, you're making statement after statement after statement, but do you understand how thin the ground is that you stand upon? I mean, I find, you know, for myself, to pull the rug out from under him would be so easy. I would hesitate to do it because it might bring about a nervous breakdown. He's so just tight. I feel like saying, see, we know each other like that. I said, man, why don't you just chill, man, loosen up. You're working too much, man. You need to go on vacation or get a girlfriend or something. Excuse me. Sometimes it can help. But anyway, I'm not going to sing a song to exemplify my point. Good to know. Okay, let me get back to this. The model for what Gerald is talking about is Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe and Southern Africa and South Africa. I guess he could also use Australia and New Zealand. Again, I said that Horne's position is basically essentialist and is a static analysis and does not deal with people, you know, and that's always a problem. Just like when we read Taylor Branch's biography of the King years, what Taylor Branch demonstrates is this rich and deep tradition of radical activism for freedom. Now, in Cornel West's interview with Jyotish, who was a student, a political science graduate student at the University of Chicago, which means, first of all, one of the most conservative political science departments in history. I know because I went there. And look, man, they ran me out of there like a runaway slave. I said, what's up in here? But I guess the FBI has something to do with that too. But Jyotish says that the struggle is for justice. Cornell says, no, the struggle is for freedom.
Yes, sir.
And he didn't put it this way, but I know what he was trying to say, that justice is the extension of freedom to law and other things. But Cornell's basic category these days is catastrophe. We heard it when we heard him speak at the University of Pennsylvania. Here he unites neo-pragmatism with a form of existentialism, I would say more Friedrich Nietzsche, but maybe Camus, Albert Camus, maybe a little bit of Sartre. With Cornell, you don't always know where he's coming from because it's more a feeling, more, you know, a stream of consciousness where he draws upon everything that's in his head, everything that he's ever read. And it is cataloged quite well. He criticizes the left, by which he means the democratic socialists and Zoran Mandani. He said, Cornell said, well, I had this debate with Bernie Sanders during his 2020 presidential campaign. Why don't you deal more with race and therefore draw Black people to your campaign? But the democratic socialists, who like social democrats going back to Germany in the 1800s, focus, and we've talked so much about, upon economics and economic class, and therefore race, which is not an economic category in political economic theory, can only be a derivative of social economic class. So even the best meaning, and even personal anti-racists like a Bernie Sanders, cannot think it through. That seems extraordinary for us, because I think we have thought it through. And I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, start by reading Du Bois and then go into Bois, but I guess, that's a little bit asking too much. But most Marxists, especially Marxist academics and economists, retreat from any real dealing with the question of race, not as an identity essentially or primarily, but race as a social system. Yeah. And therefore we have spoken of, I guess, in contradistinction to political economy, the idea of a white supremacist social system. And we can go further into that. But Cornell feels himself to be a radical and revolutionary thinker that transcends Du Bois, Robeson, and King, which I think is a quite immodest, a bit arrogant for him to do. That's why he seldom, if ever, cites King or Du Bois. He will more regularly cite Chekhov or any number of European thinkers. By the way, not so much the rationalists, not a Kant, not a Hegel, but certainly he's situated in the American tradition. But also the Black radical tradition for him is also the Black prophetic tradition. Now, what all that means, I don't want to go into now, and it's a bit difficult to understand completely. But Cornell, at the end of the day, believes that the possibilities for democratic struggle of the people are severely limited. We're already in fascism. Now, each of them in these recent interviews are dealing with the latest elections, and especially the election of Mamdani in New York. And each of them, Cornell very strongly saying he's not dealt with the question of race. That is why Black people tended not to go with him, that Mamdani represents an elite gentrifying group in New York, and that I can tell you, I would say there's a lot of resentment among Black people, which kept them either from the polls or not voting for him. Cornell says this is a malady of the immigrant. And we could understand that, especially with an elite education and elite network connections. Why should I see Black people? My world is not with them. Even though my name is Zohan Kwame Mamdani, and I'm from East Africa, But being from Africa don't make you from here and don't make you understand here. This is the problem. I'm just going to go through the last part here. I don't know what else to say about these people. But I think the problem that they have intellectually and to come up with an explanatory modality is rooted in logic and epistemology. And this is something that we were discussing at Lucian Blackwell, the question of logic. In Western intellectual and philosophical history, there are two fundamental systems of logic. One is associated with the name of Aristotle, and I guess the 6th century BC, or somewhere in the BCs, and the other with Hegel, concept of dialectics. The concept of dialectics is not new. It is probably older in terms of logics than Aristotle, and can be found in every civilization, some approach that is dialectical. However, for Aristotle and Hegel, logic was a tool to clarify and explain statements. You know, for example, for Aristotle, if we're going to do metaphysics, if we're going to do political theory, if we're going to do any of this, we have to have a system where statements one way or the other are logically consistent. Makes sense. The same for Hegel, although Hegel was looking at the history of ideas in world history. Okay? Different, but then on another level, not that different. I had often spoken, and I had to rethink myself in light of the computer revolution, and I think even AI. I used to always say, you know, the three laws of Aristotelian logic, the law of identity, the law of negation, and the law of the excluded middle. Don't remember me?
Yeah.
Okay. I used to always speak of it, A equals A, the law of identity. A does not equal B, the law of negation. And A cannot be A and not A at the same time, which is the law of the excluded middle. I want to come back to that. However, in light of computer science, I now speak of it as 1 and 0.
Okay.
Because, wait a minute, because I have to ask him about this. You want me to sing Hal Melvin and the Blue Notes featuring Teddy Pendergrass? The 1 and 0 thing. All computer programs are based on 1s and 0s. It's just that simple.
Right.
And the infinite possibilities in the 1s and 0s. It is a linear logical approach. 1 is the first position, and 0 is a negation. 0 is the position where there is not a position. 1 and 0, not B. It's 0. Okay? Did I explain that right? The 0 is absence, negation of a thing. So in Aristotle logic, 1 is 1. That's the law of identity. But 1 is not 0. It makes, that's what you did computer science, right?
A little bit, yeah.
You want to do your homework. I'm only playing, but it's 1 and 0. For Hegel, 1 and 0 are not separate. 1 and 0 are linked, what we call dialectically. Okay? A thing is not itself and not anything at the same time. The 0 is not anything. Does that make sense? It makes more sense to me now. But in a computer program, the 0 is not just a placeholder, but it is. It's a position in this series of number combinations, or combinations of 1 to 0. I think in this sense it is a far deeper and more profound representation. Hegel says that the two, 1 and nothing coexist. And the two can lead to another one, or what we call one prime. Okay? But you don't have to accept it. Just, okay. Now, I set this up to get to another point. Marx took Hegel's dialectic and applied it in its totality to material reality, to society and nature. Because for Marx, exploring the possibilities of progress, of social and revolutionary change, required a logic predisposed to understanding change. And for Hegel, change comes about as a result of a conflict between one and its opposite. I guess the question comes, well, how can something at a higher level one come out of a conflict between one and nothing? Well, that's a question we'll have to ask. But I think for Hegelian dialectics, it is a zero. Now, we can apply it to the history of ideas like Hegel did and say feudal ideas in Europe versus capitalist ideas in Europe.
Right.
The two clash and comes out of that socialism. That's the way you could think about it. But Hegel's was a philosophy of history. Aristotle's was not a philosophy of history. Okay. So already Hegel is dealing with a higher level of complexity and totalities. Because Hegel is dealing with epochs, where he talks about a zeitgeist, a spirit of the time. That is a totality and not a relationship of one statement to the other or logical consistency in that regard. Marx takes this great imaginary of Hegel and applies it to material and economic realities. Now, at Lucian Blackwell, as we have done here on occasion, we have looked at Black Reconstruction in America and the first three chapters, which are to Black Reconstruction, which the first chapter of Das Kapital is to Marx. In a lot of ways, if you look at the first chapter of Das Kapital, Marx lays out his method of analysis, and it's almost completely Hegelian. He starts with the commodity, which has two sides, use value and exchange value, and they clash. Use value and exchange value could be metaphors for the bourgeoisie and the working class, you know what I'm saying? But at every moment, to see the possibility of revolutionary change for Marx, you had to see it in society in dialectical terms. Okay? Now, just be reminded, here we're talking about the logic, not about the economic theories or economic relations. Or a large philosophy of history. By the way, I just think that Marx would have pretty much adopted just filling in materialism for ideas. He would have pretty much adopted Hegel's philosophy of history. Hegel's philosophy of history is a progressive philosophy of history, meaning that Hegel believed that history inherently is always moving forward, is always progressing, But we, in the Free School have talked about a trilectic. And I know I asked Jerry and I asked Eddie, I said, well, y'all, because they when Eddie said, well, the threes could become sixes. And now, what did you say, Jerry? I don't want to misquote you.
No, I understood what Eddie was saying.
Yeah, but then Eddie had it wrong.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, he did.
Okay.
See, what? No, but a lot of people, see, they say that the Hegelian dialectic is a triad. No, it's not. Because the Hegelian dialectic starts with one. What we are talking about is beginning with three. And three, in this Du Boisian method of Black Reconstruction, Black worker, white worker, capitalist, the three. So it is not a two, it is a three. And it does not begin with one, it begins with three. Isn't that interesting? Now, the first time I ever met Michelle Liu was at Mother Bethel AME Church at the beginning of the year of Gandhi. And we introduced ourselves, and the first question I asked her, she told me she had graduated from Penn in statistics. I said, could you help me understand how we can go from two to threes? I wish we had pursued that, Michelle.
We still can.
I really wanted to pursue.
It's only been 6 years.
It's been 6 years. I mean, we still have. You avoid me like the plague when I try to. You won't even discuss it with me anymore. I feel like everything but a child of God. But anyway, the question is, let us say that Aristotle and Hegel are absolutely right when it comes to ideas and the clarity of statements. I'm prepared to acknowledge that. But when it comes to complex social systems, for example, Marx said that we could take Hegel's dialectics of unities, of opposites, and apply it to the capitalist economic and social system. But what Marx or Hegel did not see was the color line. The color line is a metaphor, of course. What happens when a social system is constructed where you have class, but there is, in the capitalist system, but there is the other thing as important, and that is race, or the racial division. Now, we have spoken of this trilectic. Matter of fact, I looked it up on ChatGPT, and Samir, you'd be very impressed. Don't put my name in, just put trilectic. Why you laughing? Whenever you wake up from a good sleep, you laugh. But but they have a whole thing on it.
I'm sure.
No, and I said, damn, how did you even know about this? But
What the hell is chat?
oh Lord, damn,
I don't have the slightest idea what the hell it is. I hate this.
let me ask you this. Have you ever heard of AI?
Artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
I do not know what the hell it is either.
Well, look, I'll do a tutorial for you this coming week.
No. You don't need to waste my time with this tutorial. I just have to be honest and tell you, I don't know what the hell.
No, I'm gonna explain this.
You can ask more specific.
So you asked ChatGPT a topic that you're an expert in.
Yeah, well, I didn't know, because you usually put your name and then the thing, but my point is to be transparent about all this. We are talking about social agency. We're not talking about everything. However, I think if we went further and deeper into this, that what we would discover is that 3 is a more appropriate beginning than 1. Now, 1, I have to tell you, that's James Brown on the 1. You know, not on the 2, on the 1, bang. But anyway, well, I could speak. But
Can I?
what,
Can I
well, let me just make one last point. I guess for us, the dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic, leaves too many unanswered questions. Obviously, the Aristotelian, more linear logic would not be able to answer much of anything. However, in our search to discover the potentiality of democratic and revolutionary struggle, we have looked at the body of Du Bois's work, and I think it is far richer than either Horne or Cornell can acknowledge. And we have said that in his study of America and the American social system, it is a trilectic. All that means, I'm not yet clear about, you know, but my last point is just, but this also is connected to epistemology. How you know. A lot of people call it standpoint epistemology. Epistemologies emerge from the ground upon which you operate in. Cornell would readily acknowledge that. Now, I won't get into what is the difference between rationalist epistemology and existentialist epistemology, unless you ask me.
I'll ask
But-
ChatGPT. Yeah, why would
Ask that, yeah. Oh, you on the chat. But I'll end with that.
I just wanted one small clarification, which is that when you say that a dialectic starts from 1, what I thought it meant, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, what I thought it meant is that you start from the thing and its opposite, or the thing and its
Absolutely.
negation makes the pair.
But it still starts with 1.
One. Yeah, it starts with 1 and then the opposite of that forms the other. And then when you say that a trilectic starts from 3, it's like 3 interconnected, interrelated things. Like what really helped is when you gave us the example of the black worker, white worker, and the plantation or the capitalist class, where there are interdependencies in between these 3, but you can't say one is, the opposite of any one of them.
This is huge, man. And, I have not worked that out. Of course, sometimes I think about dialectics within trilectics.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Where there is a dialectical relationship, let us say, between the black worker and the white worker, between the black worker and the capitalist. But in the system itself, these particular dialectics do not negate this trilectic.
Right.
That you can't begin with the 2 or the 1 and the 0 and then get to the 3. You have to begin with the 3. And my point, and when I talk about 1s and 0s, I'm talking about mathematics, even aggregation, and so much of what computer programming does. If I'm right, tell me if I'm right or wrong about. Y'all went to the most elite universities to study this.
Could Eddie.
But hey, Eddie, you had it wrong. You're doing the, no, you're doing the, no, you were doing the dialectics. And see, there are 3. You can do three, call it three, but dialectics, like Aristotelian logic, begins with the one. And the two positions are not A and B, but 1 and 0, which is what computer programming is based upon. But it all begins with the one. Hegel begins with the one, but he sees the 1 and the 0 in an active relationship. But it begins, what I was trying to show, and after I texted you and Jerry,
Did the text message not clarify? Not really?
Yeah, but I just, see, it helped me to clarify what I was thinking. And then talking to Porba on her research, where flocking, where birds flock together.
Oh, shit.
This is another complication of
That's
all
so
the
interesting.
When
things.
you say the point, what
Yeah,
is
that makes
that?
sense.
Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
What do you mean by birds flocking? What's
Yeah,
the
'cause-
example? What is the example?
Well, like you see a bunch of birds flying south
Yeah, it's,
as a flock.
it's always three.
See,
Oh, yeah.
it's basic, the theory is that it's two birds
Oh, I didn't know.
that self-generate the flock. And what Porba, and I'm still waiting the explanation of your dissertation. What Porba shows in her essay, a published essay, is that no, it takes three to generate a flock,
Yeah.
not two.
Yeah, that makes sense.
At least three. She says at least three. Now, what we're saying is that at least three is necessary to have a logical system that can explain the American social system. You need at least, not 1 and 0,
Yeah, that makes sense.
but 3.
But how would you, both logically speaking, but also historically speaking,
Right.
it's not like, because we're making specific claims about American history. And I don't know if we can even map on this whole trilectic thing to like world history in the way that, let's say, Hegel would.
But
or
do we
Marx.
have to?
I'm not saying we have to, but then you would have to explain what created the three in the first place. Does that make sense?
Makes all the sense.
I accept that it's our starting point, but it's like,
How do you do more?
but like, because the whole, as far as I understand, the whole Hegelian thing is that you have something, but then in order to have that thing, like to know it, you need to know its opposite. It's so like, even like King talked about, it's like being and non-being, or it's like, that's the 1 or 0. Like the being is 1, and then the 0 is the non-being. And that they're united in terms of like what then becomes like becoming.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm still confused about what is it that creates the 3 in the first place.
Yeah.
Both as a logical question, but also as a historical, like concrete historical question.
See, and here I would say this: why do we even need a universal theory of all history?
Right.
And certainly, rather than a more or less easy transition from the 2, let us say, to a third position, a synthesis, well, we have no evidence that it's ever gone down like that. So for us, rather than a synthesis that is socialism, which is not understood, basically, when they say socialism, they're talking about socialist policies. What you hear Richard Wolff, socialism is a set of policies that redistribute wealth, that establishes social and economic justice. That is not that far removed from a liberal idea of progress. That's why social democracy and Marxism and progressive liberalism, progressives overlap. However,
Well, because I guess to what you're saying, one could offer a potential narrative that the normal, quote unquote, the normal logic of the development of human history is essentially it is basically dialectical. And that maybe Marx was right about the materialist, like his kind of historical materialist conception of how history developed.
But he doesn't know.
But he doesn't. But I'm saying this is a potential narrative in which one could say that, oh, okay, well then, the normal development of, let's say, capitalism proceeded in this way, and that you're still dealing with basically dialectics, but that then with the advent of the transatlantic slave trade, that I actually think you've kind of said this before in different ways, but that like one possible explanation is that the exigencies, the needs of capitalism created the color line, but then the color line then became determinative in its own way. And so that's one potential explanation for the emergence of the three basic historical
And the third doesn't have to be the Black worker. The third is the, whether you want to call it darker humanity or the oppressed. Because actually Du Bois kind of makes this point at the end of Russian America. He says that the degradation of the worker, basically in some ways historically speaking, the defining quote unquote modern struggle for modernity becomes really universal in the struggle for colored modernity. Like he basically says that the creation of the color line, the greatest example of which would be the transatlantic slave trade. But the second greatest example, he says, is the exploitation of colonial labor creates essentially threes. It creates the modern forces of history are hence not two, whether you want to call it the capitalist or the worker, the oppressor or the oppressed. It creates threes with the color line, which also helps explain why class struggle, political, even like the dynamics of political economy, the worker and the capitalist are insufficient to explain that we live in that even like the world we live in is defined by a social system, that it's not as simple as resolving economic forces or economic systems, but actually essentially the color line, which is, anyways, I'm agreeing with Jeremiah that I actually think that also explains our position of why Du Bois is perhaps the most defining thinker of our time, is because he explains why threes, like the only way to explain the now or the future would be threes.
And I think one thing is, I think the only way he could have gotten to this, whether he thought the logic of it out altogether, was that he had to abandon, at least in practice, the idea of one. The idea of a one, you know what I'm saying? A one and a zero.
So why?
I don't know why everything, but you just, I'm sorry.
Well, I guess the backtrack is the purpose of logic. Like, I'm just...
See, this is the big question, the purpose of logic. I mean, if you ask Purba, it would be one thing, maybe Shantanu, another thing, Eddie, a different thing. The purposes of logic are different. And the purpose to which we put logic is different from, let us say, Hegel or Marx. What they were attempting to explain, and certainly Marx, is inadequate to even begin to explain what we're trying to explain. But let me let Eddie and then Nuri.
Yeah, so I actually don't understand our point of disagreement yet. I actually don't understand our point of disagreement yet. To my understanding, we established that
I said it one more time.
Come closer.
Yeah,
Okay, let me come up here.
yeah.
Yeah, I still don't understand our point of disagreement, actually. I thought that we had established, for example, a special thing about threes is that the initial conditions matter a lot.
Yes.
Similar to how the three-body problem of, like, you know, the celestial bodies, the initial, without understanding the initial conditions, you're not able to truly have enough predictive power to explain the future. And so understanding how we even got to these threes in the first place, what was the exigency, and how these threes took a life of its own are instrumental. And then the other thing is, unlike dialectics, there's like a multiplicative factor of the relationships. So dialectical relationship, if it was just the worker and the capitalist, you know, they have dialectical relationship with each other too. Whereas with trialectics, you know, you have the white worker, the black worker, and the planter. Not only does the white worker have a relationship to the black worker and the planter, and the planter to the to the black worker.
Yes.
In addition to that, we also see that the white worker and the planter have a relationship to the black worker.
And when you explained that to me on Thursday, I understood more than when you wrote me the text where you said you have to start with a mother and a father, and then you have a baby. I said, that's not the three I'm talking about. That's more the Hegelian dialectic.
So you think I'm just
Yes.
finding new pairings for dialectics?
No, what you're saying now, I think I completely agree with.
Oh, okay.
That if you begin with three, and you're right the way you put the conditions of a logical explanation, not logic for the pure purpose of logic, but to I agree with you. Now, the question is sixes. And I know how you explain, and that I think it is very important, and I got this also from Purba, that things are not separate. The one or the three are not just one or three. The one has a relationship to what is not one, and the elements of the three are not just separate, but they're interrelated. Now, the question, maybe you can help me as you think about this, is the relationship, because you did say the one has relationship with one other. You could basically say two others.
Yes.
So the six could be nine. You know, I mean, using that kind of approach.
Okay.
But I firmly agree with you. But what I want to say is, indeed, this is the logical method we must use. And the reason I brought it up, and I forgot to say why I even brought this up today. Amen. What?
Why?
I mean, I might be old, but I can forget too. Yo, oh, he forgot. Oh, no, but you're absolutely right. But here, just a problem in it, because I know you do computer science, and that's all linear.
Right.
So when I read your explanation in the text, I said, oh, he's going back to linearity, to arithmetic.
I see where you're going.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I think, well, let me let Noor, go ahead.
Another defining feature of the trilectic, so like the dialectic, you have like an inevitability, a destiny. You know, one negation to another. And so you have the ultimate conclusion, you know, feudalism had to go down to capitalism, capitalism had to go down to communism, and then communism, we're gonna have the erosion of the state and some utopia. It's gonna be splendid. The trialectics is more expressive. You cannot have this finality because you have all these other expressive possibilities, which after you jump from one possibility to another, now, oh my God, now you're in this back where you started, more expressive possibilities. Right now, the defining feature of the American logic has been the white worker's relationship to the capitalist, and their dual relationship to the black worker. And that has given us a certain American logic that Du Bois has been able to explain. And then King is like, well, what if the black worker and the white worker have a relationship together?
and their relationship opposed to the capitalists, then what happens? What is that
but see,
logic of history that
absolutely.
we should follow?
Absolutely. And could I just say one quick thing, Nuri, as to what Jerry was asking about? See, we don't know enough about the history of the world.
Yeah.
Prior.
You know, let us take Korean history,
Right.
which I think is a very interesting history, and not like the history of Germany.
Right.
You know, the conditions for a trilectical logical, I mean, and it could be as simple as, look, we want to explain a society where the color line is determinative, you know, what logical methods do we need to explain that, that you might not need to explain the history of Europe?
Yes.
Or to explain computer programming. You know what I'm saying? Logics have this flexibility, but go ahead, Nuri, I'm sorry.
Well, I think a lot of things made sense to me where, I just think it does. Well, okay, first off, I think Du Bois, like actually taking seriously this idea that Du Bois is the father of a new science, which is a social science, and acknowledging, the complexity of human beings and human interactions. And I think that in itself is distinct or new from like Aristotle, like, I don't know, like natural science, linearity, numbers, mathematics, and even Hegel, which is like philosophy and history. And even what you were saying about socialism being expressed or best understood through policies, as opposed to what would the actual human relationships look like in a socialist society. And I don't think that we actually know scientifically what that would mean. And I think this thing of like, what is logic for? And I think logic is both to be able to do science, to solve problems, like pressing problems, and also to like fundamentally understand things. And I think that what Du Bois is saying, like with the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And basically what all of these thinkers were saying about the 20th century, which is that we have conquered nature, we have built the atomic bomb, we are able to travel across the world, but do we actually understand like the nature of human beings? Do we understand how we want to relate to each other? And I think in that realm, like what is needed or what is missing and what we're most limited by in our knowledge is not data or information or like access to archives or like the archaeological record at this point. But what we most need or like are constrained by is like our actual ideas or ideology. And
This is huge. This is why what you're saying is an argument against positivism, that the logic of nature can be lifted up and applied to stuff.
Because I've been confused by positivism for kind of a while, where I was like, I don't understand, because I think we've grown up in such a positivist time.
Absolutely.
Where I think the default assumption is that actually we can lift everything that we've learned from natural science and superimpose it onto human society. And that will give us like not just an ideological framework, but it will actually give us insight into how we should structure our human societies, into how we should act. And we should assume that this is the way that like the universe works or that human beings work. And I just don't think that's true. And I don't think that it's sufficient. And I say that like as literally a biologist who like I'm literally dealing with like ecology and like this thing of like dealing with threes, like species interactions.
You say typologies?
No, species ecology. So like ecology.
Ecology.
Which is like literally the relationship of organisms and like species or different types to each other and how that changes like systems, and like evolution being like the change of time. But I think this.
You say the change in time or change over time?
Like change over time,
over time.
Like how relations can change the structure and the relationships between things. Absolutely. And also like the things in themselves through time. And like that gives me a lot to like think about. But the problem with threes is that, like you can make infinitely more combinations, but those combinations are in and of themselves still just linear.
Yeah.
Like it adds linear complexity
So why?
that is supposed to help you understand it better. But it's a reductionist thing because
That's
there
right, that's
is
right.
such a thing as an emergent property.
Yeah.
Where that comes from when you add complexity by adding like basically once you get to threes. But I think the extra
What's an
important,
emergent property?
like it's not something that is just, you can reduce it to like, okay, if there are threes, then yeah, like you have the relationship of each thing to itself. But then if two of them are interacting with the one, or like in the three themselves, there's something that is not, that comes from like the totality of the whole, like that doesn't exist when either of those three things exist by themselves or just with the
It's
other.
also the notion of dialectics in the first place.
Yes.
The what?
It's like the notion of dialectics in the first place is you have an emergence, a transcendence that emerges out of
An emergence.
the dynamic relationship between the being and the non-being.
Yes. But I think the other, like basically the reason why social science requires a new logic that cannot just be biological or like natural scientific, I think is the category of like human agency or human consciousness itself. And that's I think where like Du Bois like law and chance matters, but also the fact that human beings actually can make choices. And that's like Eddie, what you were saying about the alliance or the allegiance of the Black worker and the white worker to the capitalist or to the planter. That has been a historical process that is not, we don't see it as inherently like fundamentally, innately like a constructed identity, because that's even why we ask the question, where did these threes come from in the first place? It is not necessarily organic, but it is fundamentally true that we see threes and we have to identify the threes and start from the threes to be able to actually think out what is happening and ultimately make sense of it in the world, because that's what we're called to do. But then in that, it's even that in the threes we ask like, what is the leading edge? What is the dynamic edge currently? And when we ask like, could the leading edge stop being the white worker and the planter to be the Black worker and the white worker, so that the white worker becomes like the Black worker and there is a proletariat? Like it basically is asking like, what will it take for people to be aware of that and to also actively choose, like to choose to like.
Can I make another just weak and strong relationships? You know, in Hegel and Marx, all relationships dialectically are the same power and force. What about a weak relation? Take the current situation of the relationship of Trump to the MAGA movement. It's weakened. Or the relationship of, you know, but you can have strong relationships and weak relationships. We could say the relationships among white people, just the internal, let's say dynamics. We could use dialectics, but the internal dynamics of white people are weak relationships, retreat into the individual. Relationships among Black people are stronger relationships, you know, and that's why the possibility, and I agree with you about agency and consciousness is a huge factor. That's why it's hard to know what things may have been in Korea in 1600. Because we don't know the history of consciousness of Korea. But let me shut up. Go ahead, Nuri.
No, but then the consciousness thing is also important because if human consciousness like drives and can determine history, then it also matters what our framework of logic and of possibility like even is.
Say that one more time, please. I just
like what are, like if human consciousness is a deciding factor in human history, which I feel like we do agree and have established, then even being conscious or aware or understanding what we mean by a trialectics or like an actual theory of social science, as opposed to being stuck in like, I guess, Hegelian dialectics or like the Marxist framework of thought and ideology, or even just like Aristotle or like liberalism. Like all of those things, like basically the ideological content and substance of that philosophy is potentially like a constraint in human action. And so we're seeking, like ideas or a logic that is actually freeing, that gives the most agency to the people. And I think one last thing that I was thinking of is, I was like, like in what realms is dialectics like genuinely useful? Like how does it help you to think things out? And I was thinking about it like in relation to like the man-woman dialectics, like Hegel used it with like the master slave.
Yeah.
Like those are useful because they're basically like archetypal relations that you could say structure or are replicated in human society. But ultimately, I don't believe that like human society or all human relationships just boil down to a tube of like, it's only like the movement of society is like determined by how men and women relate to each other. And that's the driving force of history. Like, I don't know if I really believe that. I think that there's something more. And I think, yeah, Du Bois arrives at threes because he's actually trying to look truthfully at like the social situation that we're in. And two, like, if you had already read Hegel or already been thinking about twos, maybe it's easier to try to then cast like what you see into twos. But I think if you actually start from a scientific perspective, you would see like how Du Bois establishes the black worker, the white worker, and the planter. And his main a priori is not like, there must be twos, so I'm gonna find twos. But his main thing is like, I believe in human beings, and I believe that the black worker is a human being.
See that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was.
Let me let Michelle come in, and then Sarah.
Well, just on that point you were saying, when you're talking about the dialectic of men and women, then you think about something like Baldwin's novels, Country, where he introduces the way the color line and the human response to it mediates social relationships. Okay, let's say Giovanni's room is between like two white men, but still the question is, why is it difficult for Americans to love or to reveal themselves to each other? And then in another country, you have Rufus, a black man, with Leona, a white woman. And then I forget their names, but you have other white characters and their relationships to each other. So like the question that I had is, what would it have looked like had Du Bois begun with the one? And I asked that to understand why he needed to begin with the three.
That is so interesting.
Well, the question I wanted to ask is like, is a linear historical logic for America basically someone like Garvey or Fanon who say, I reject white supremacy and hence I leave America, versus the reason that Du Bois or Baldwin needed to go where they needed to is to say like, well, I don't believe this has ever been a white country. And if anything, I believe that it is black civilization that is the providence of this nation, like in the future. And I want someone to like help me answer that question, because I like this question a lot of like, why was it necessary to begin with the three? And this is also something I want to ask, but like even mapping it to my own experience, I was mostly socialized in the family unit growing up, like the child of immigrants. And then I felt like there was a society out there that I would be also shaped by and trying to understand or to find my place in.
Okay.
But I felt really stuck basically in ordering like myself within society and developing it as a human being that was both myself and like a social human being, until I found the color line, or what my relationship to the color line would be. And like, it's hard for me to articulate it, but that search for the relationship to the color line being like the major existential question for the American people as a whole seems really central to me in this understanding of like why it must be three. And if we're talking about like weak or strong relationships, I think Du Bois would argue, and I would also argue, that it is the motive, like the motive force of the three is that essential question of the color line and what it has done, like to human beings in history in the 20th and 21st century. But that question of like, why did Du Bois maybe begin with the three is like something I want to stay on.
Yeah, I think in part there's an answer in his preface to The Soul's Black Folk, where that last line he says, need I mention, I'm bone of the bone and flesh of the flesh of those within the veil, which is a statement of his epistemology. So he could have adopted let's say, a Kantian epistemology of abstract categories. but he chooses an existential relationship. So to the question of why, and we'll never know finally or absolutely, because there's an imaginary here. Why would he go to 3 rather than what was standard European logic and do 1 or 2, 1 and 0? I think it was because his own life experience, where the world did not appear the way European philosophy had been talking about the world. In a certain sense, he rejects, and I think, because he doesn't do it out, he does it in very, calm, that the world was different than the world that European philosophers and social scientists had been attempting to explain, that he had to literally, not all the way, but start anew, that this was not Europe, that slavery and 250 years of it, and then the defeat of Reconstruction, he said there's something else here, and it will take a new science. And I think, but I would, just if you might at some point, and I'm going to look at it again, the chapter in Dusk of Dawn called of Science and Empire. Well, go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I think for me it goes back to this thing of how, like, okay, Baldwin will say this has never been a white nation, or this is the last white nation, because even what you're saying about the European philosophy not working here because of who Black people were and what they achieved. Like, for example, I spent some time studying the European existential philosophers when I was searching for a worldview that could explain why I was so existential in this society. But I felt like Sartre or Camus or even the people that you're describing that Cornel West associates, like, it exhausted itself so quickly in this context because, I mean, for a European nation that is actually a white nation, I don't see like a serious civilizational alternative emerging to like a post-war Europe. But I don't feel like I'm explaining it very well, but something is clicking for me in terms of like why it needed to be Du Bois and the question of the color line.
See,
and
I think it was that imaginary leap.
Yeah.
See, there's something, and he did it so early on. When I say early, in his 20s, late 20s, when he makes that call that the problem is the color line.
Right.
And you could even say the word problem, you could use the word crisis. The crisis of the modern world is the color line. This totally shifts philosophically, because Marx would say the problem of modernity is the class conflict.
Right.
Now, is Marx more brilliant, more perceptive than Du Bois? Or was there something in the European logics, also epistemology, that predisposed him?
Well, because if you can see that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, then Camus wouldn't have had to despair the way he despaired, or Hemingway, or
why not?
Because you can find yourself, ideally, even if you're European, to an anti-colonial struggle or a freedom struggle on behalf of.
I don't think so. See, no, the reason I say this is that what is philosophical and logical normality in European history and development is abnormal for Du Bois and Baldwin. Baldwin always talks about the America as abnormal. You know what I'm saying? So once you flip it, and what is normal, let us say, for European even radical philosopher like Camus seems to be verging on something like nonsense or self-absorption or narcissism for a Baldwin. You know, and I take as an example when he is asked, how does it feel to be a gay black man? And he says, I don't use that language. To me, it's him saying, I don't see the world through gay lenses. This is hugely important. And I think the postmodernist queer ascendancy has to do with a new normality for bourgeois society that still does not recognize the color line as not just, I use, I think, what is like, as, but the color line as, what is the word? Well, I'll put it this way, a necessary and irreversible part of the whole social system. It is not just an add-on, that you could have had this system. And that's why we always go back to civilization. Because if you just look at the political economy, you have not gotten to the deep structure. But go ahead, Michelle, I interrupted you.
No, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, I have a question, which is if what Du Bois was saying that American history is abnormal, then was the dialectics sufficient in explaining European history? Is dialectics sufficient to explain European history?
That's something we have to answer.
Or is it that this trialectics has implications actually for looking at all?
Yes.
Now it does.
Yes.
I think so.
I feel like pride.
And then I think the other thing that I was trying to figure out is that with Aristotelian logic,
Yes.
there is this thing of a thing and its opposite, which is one and a lack of one.
That's right.
Zero.
Right.
But I feel like, or what I'm
Yes.
hearing in trialectics is that each of those pieces aren't necessarily opposites of the other.
Right.
And
Yes.
okay.
This is very
Because I think that's what I'm hearing, that this, there's like some, I feel like different people are saying different things, which is that in this three, does one side to have to be the opposite of the other?
Right.
The same way that in Aristotelian logic, it's
Right.
one thing and it's
Because
opposite.
I do think it's important that it's not like we completely abandoned even the concept of like capitalism, for example. It's like we're still dealing with the capitalist, the white worker, the black worker. And even if one now assumes that the color line is more determinative, I don't think that that means that you just, like, because I don't know, I just feel like that there's possibility for different logics to operate at different, almost hierarchies of relationships. Does that make sense?
Because I just wanted to add, I feel like for me, it's always a trap to want to put everything into neat little categories. You think that's good? I think that's bad.
I think to put everything into neat category.
No, but I feel like, the example in physics and the example in math and logic and the example of sociology are not like directly mappable like that. Like I think there's a basic philosophy that it points towards, but direct one-to-one maps are difficult because one of the things that I'm confused about now, and I'll raise it as an open question, is this thing of a thing and its negation still being an important concept, right? Like it's still an important concept. And in some ways, I feel like the way I'm realizing this, the way I have interpreted Du Bois saying that the central contradiction of modernity is the color line, is also in some ways him identifying that as the principle, in some ways, lines along which like you have to think about the logic of society and so on. So then in that sense, I feel like he does start with a 1 and a 0, which is the absence or presence of the color line. But then in explaining the complexities of the modern capitalistic society, especially in the American context, if you take that as the 1 versus the 0, then you have to redefine the class relationships between the white worker and the black worker, and then you get the threes. This is sort of how it's making sense to me, but I find it difficult to, like, this statement that Du Bois doesn't start from 1 or 0, but from the threes is confusing at this point. Because there's also something very central in the Boisian science and sociology of the color line, which is not like the absence or presence of the color line seems to be very central. So, yeah.
Well, I think one thing, just a consequence of not, well, I got this from you when we talked the other night, where you said that in science, every explanation must be fitted into a logical framework, usually a formal logical or mathematical logical framework, which is 0 and 1, you know. And so Du Bois, not to fit data into something, but to find a way to explain and further unravel or further bring to the fore new data and new knowledge. It had to be a different logic. It had to be a different logic. Now, if I could just say one small thing, Serafine, then as to Eddie's concept of every set of relationships generate other relationships, you know, and this is true. This is true. So 3s can be 6s, can be 9s, can be 12s, can be, but it seems like everything moves from 3 rather than from 1. Now, I don't know what quantum computing does, but I'm in your house now, Eddie. I don't know. I don't know what quantum computing does, but it seems to me, and even AI is predicated upon a higher order of logics that is not bound to 1 and 0, which is analog, the analogical computing. If we went to quantum, you know, we would have to approach, so, and I got this from you, Purba, we would have to approach reality from approach reality from what reality gives us, presents us with, and not what we want it to be. That's why Du Bois does not take the Hegelian Marxist body and try to explain the situation in this country. He has to start anew. And he always says that, you know, they've had it all wrong. Herbert Spencer, a positivist, wanted a biological analogy to the evolution of society. And Du Bois says, well, and that's why I agree with you too about this, Eddie. There are no guarantees. You got to be awake day and night to be on your post to study this. What is it? And the reason I brought it up in relationship to Horne and Cornell is that they are logically, I mean, definitely Horne, logically an adolescent. Are you not? I mean, when I listen, I'm saying, wait a minute, what? These relationships are complex and ever emerging. And the whole concept of what dialectics was supposed to give us, it doesn't, which is a hyper dynamic, hyper movement situation. It doesn't give us that. And so we're not looking for, you know, any bombastic, oh, everything is going to go up in flames tomorrow, anything like, but we're looking at incremental, not incremental changes. Because these relationships, one, are historically constituted. You know, when you talk about black worker, white worker, capitalist, you're talking about historically constituted social categories. But the thing is that we're looking for that dynamism, that dialectic, if you will. That, yes, but go ahead, Paul.
No, I just wanted to add one small thing, which I think to me feels like the most central newness of this idea of threes versus twos, which is related to the idea of complexity, because in the context of the class struggle in this country, I think what I get from Du Bois is, like, there's a question to be raised, is, you know, a lot of people, black leftists and so on, like Jim Horton, this whole thing of the centrality of the black worker. I think the conception there always is there has to be, the working class in America has to be conscious of itself as you know, the working class. But the biggest obstacle to that is, like, you know, divisions along the color line, like the white worker kept separate from the black worker and so on. So it's only when those artificial barriers can be, like, removed and the workers can come together and become conscious of themselves as the working class, that is when the actual revolutionary struggle for a socialistic state and then forward from there to a communistic state can happen. And that second step is what constitutes the revolutionary kernel in some ways. But I think what we get from Du Bois, and this is related to what Nuri was saying about it being a question of transformation of human relationships and social relationships, in the process of the white worker moving closer to the black worker is in itself the revolutionary process in this country, is what you get from Du Bois. It's not that it's waiting for a next stage of struggle for socialism, but in the dynamic movement of the white worker towards the black worker is where, you know, the contradictions of both, maybe the color line and the class line, to be resolved. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
you are. Yeah. But I just no, y'all go there. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I would say, and this is Nuri's point, you know, if you have these historically constituted social categories, then what moves them? What motivates their relationships? And it is consciousness. And therefore, we are absolutely right to talk about studying the history of consciousness and the ideological history of the country, the ideological history of black people, because that is also, now, the question is ideology another point? So we're talking about force, or is ideology, okay, maybe not, I could hear you. But ideology is like a fuel, you know, etc. But,
well, can I just make one? One small point is, because the reason why we bring up the color line is not just for fun, because it's like a thing we're inheriting, but because the point of consciousness, I think, is really important, because the reason why there exists threes is because the reason why we're even talking about black worker, white worker, and capitalist, even without Du Bois, let's just say we have no Du Bois, is because if you, like, this is why, for example, like, before we even go to flocking and natural sciences, like, if we just focus on the example, the specificity of the American situation and the question of what defines the forces of history in America, why we have what we have, the future, blah, 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 is like, you have, like, the kind of in response to what Perb was saying is that the white worker, it's not just the color line creates a white worker, it's that the white worker thinks and acts like a white worker. That is a historically proven thing. And you can find in many different examples. The black worker, he thinks and acts like a black worker. The capitalist thinks and acts. There's, whether you want to call it ideology, whatever, there's an actual proven fact of conscious. There's three different consciousnesses that make them act the way they act. It's not just because we're like, oh, why can't, like, this is what Marxist-Leninists today would say. They'd be like, why can't the white worker and black worker just get together? Well, because they are not the worker. They have distinct historically constituted consciousnesses for reasons that Du Bois goes into a lot when we talk about it. But I guess because the other thing I just wanted to raise is the reason why I think it's good for us to be specific about even, like, Du Bois is grappling, this is from last week's research, Du Bois is dealing with the question of the defeat of Reconstruction because it puts on the table an ideal that why do the three categories not all come together on the same ideal? This is what the Marxists, this is Marx, everyone was asking, the Enlightenment thinkers were asking the question of democracy. Why is it that humanity, why is that humanity is not moving closer to democracy? Isn't that kind of the question on the table, right? Why are human beings not reaching the ideal of democracy or human freedom, a rule of the people by all people? Like why the different paths or solutions towards this ideal of democracy? And Du Bois is, I feel like Du Bois is basically with Black Reconstruction, where the threes come up with the first three chapters, is Du Bois is making a point of, you can't answer the question of why with Reconstruction, literally the first historical possibility of democracy in America, why is it that the threes do not all coalesce into one? Demos, whatever, the unit of democracy. Why is it that all the quote, all the peoples of America are not coalescing into a one? So that in America,
one out of two, which would then look more like what Marx was talking about.
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Well, I was going with your defined 1 and 0, like those who are for democracy and the 0 who are for not democracy. Like, why is it that? And the reason Du Bois, and actually Du Bois explains the reason why the American situation doesn't become more quote unquote simple into a 1 and nothing, is because you have threes.
Yeah.
That's like if you treat that's so. I'm just making the point that like, we're also not just trying to like explain history out of like from slavery until now, but we're actually trying to explain the question on the table is the concrete question of why is it that America with emancipation did not actually achieve freedom or democracy?
And why not have threes? If you look at the situation, why would you try to fit that into 2?
Yeah.
Just so you would have a more quote perfect logic. But the logic grows out of the actual circumstance.
Hence, well, that's also why I understand why you want to talk about logic, because Horne's solution to address the specificity of the American situation is to say settlers. It's still two. It's a binary of settlers and
that's right.
Africans of the world. I don't know. Settlers and non-settlers.
He has to be. This is the problem of natural science. That when you try to work out the mathematics of it, you have very limited choices. But go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand that logic that you're putting forth, and I think one of the limitations of dialectics that people map onto, there's the agent or the movement of that history, they use synthesis and negation, right? You have thesis, they might be like, feudal lord, antithesis, peasant, and then synthesis, capitalist. And then, so, in our situation, it should just be the worker and the capitalist, and then the synthesis is some kind of socialism, and that is a negation of what was before. But there's something different happening when you have.
Could I just ask you a quick question? Now, when you described that, how did you feel about that, knowing what you already know about American society?
It's insufficient.
Yeah, you feel, like I've come all this far to end up with this. You don't feel satisfied just at the,
And looking at Du Bois, for example, you do have, black worker, white worker, planter, and they have a certain relationship. But then, and there is, a defeat of slavery, there's certain negation of that. And there is a certain negation of the color line, but it looks a little different, for example, with the dictatorship of the black proletariat in South Carolina, where the planter relationship is weakened, and now the white worker and the black worker have a new relationship.
Absolutely.
And emerging out of that is a new logic of history for the future of this country that I still think includes negation in some way, but I think there's another motive force there, also mediated by ideology that is not so simple as thesis, antithesis, and just negation. And I don't have the words to describe it, but I'm just sharing it with you.
But I think the fact that you bring up negation as a logical category in Hegel. In Aristotle, negation must be rejected. That's the law of the excluded middle. But for, me and Jerry went through this a couple years ago, but for Hegel, negation is indispensable. Now, I agree with yours because there is truth in the way Marx did it, in the way Hegel did. There's truth there, but it is not enough. So where does negation fit into this? Or is negation only the situation, logical situation, if you're dealing with dialectical opposites? By the way, all opposites are not dialectical opposites. But so we have this, because we're dealing with a real social situation, and we're dealing with public intellectuals and ideologues that are commenting upon it. So you have to ask yourself, besides what you're saying in your words, what is your logic? What is your epistemology? I mean, for me, I'm just tell me so I'll know. But it's all obscured behind language and words. But go, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, John.
To me, it's an evolutionary process because our consciousness is constantly changing, we're constantly growing, and we have new ideas. So I think that it would have to be an evolutionary process in the making for democracy, because we're constantly growing, we're constantly changing, and our consciousness always changes from moment to moment. It's not stationary. It's eclectic. It's always changing. So
can I make a couple, since you brought up evolution, which is a biological term. This is very important. By the way, you can read Du Bois until the cows come home. You'll never see, at least I'm not aware, of the use of a natural analogy to explain a social situation. He always analyzes society from the standpoint of society. Now, most people who adopt evolutionary biology to explain social history do it, I think, for several. One is a teleological point. In other words, everything in the end will be okay. You remember I know a few years ago in the Black Lives Matter, we gonna be all right. Oh, that was Kendrick Lamar. Oh, that's a great discovery. We're gonna be all right. Yeah. But anyway, see, the question is, I think more than evolution, and I think this is in biology more these days, the question of complexity. Because from a macro point of view, it's comfortable to talk about evolution. From a microbiological standpoint, you have to talk about complexity or uncertainty, to use Heisenberg. The uncertainty principle, by the way, which I think in the work we do, we have to be mindful of uncertainty. The other thing I would say, John, most modern Western thinking is based upon a movement or predisposition towards order and balance. Does this make sense where I put? In other words, the normal is always the point where supply and demand are equal. The normal is the stable situation. The normal is something like normality. But what we're saying is, and this is what I think Bois was, what is, because there are all sides on the question, what is normal? What is normal in the white worldview, and I'm using this in a broad sense, is the color line is normal.
Right.
Black inequality is normal. From the black standpoint, it's abnormal. It's not normal. So, but I'm saying that all of these, the approaches, modes of knowing must be deployed. I mean, I think what you're saying, Eddie, a high degree of uncertainty, or I think Nori said the same, a high degree of uncertainty is unleashed. So, okay, Gerald Horne, you figured it out. Oh, this is a settler colony. Now, you ain't never said that before, so when you come up with this? So now it's a settler colony. So it gives certainty to an uncertain reality. And because, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know how to really start to connect the dots, but I appreciated just how, I just want to go all the way back to how you started today's discussion in terms of why it was that you wanted to focus upon Gerald Horne and Cornel West. And then the third person I suppose that we've begun to talk about is essentially the counter example of Du Bois and the example of free school, which I'm actually thinking a lot about because I'm reflecting on the middle panel of your birthday symposium, which was about Du Bois, and the fact that actually one of the things that we probably could have done, but I think we kind of saved for a discussion like this was, we talked about Molefe Asante, another person who likes to talk about like ones or twos, basically Africanness and whiteness, but also you wanted that panel. I know we were talking about it. We were really interested at one point in seeing if we could fit in a conversation about what are other Black public intellectuals now, the ones that you remarked upon in your 2 essays in the 90s, that also supposedly draw upon Du Bois, but that revolutionary, dynamic, democratic, like essence of Du Bois that I think only the free school and only this kind of, revolutionary application of Du Bois to this time of so much uncertainty, to be able, like as you were saying, I really like what you said about if you look at a figure like Gerald Horne and how he responded to at least 3 things, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the civil rights movement, and Trump. And then you can even add a 4th thing of like Mamdani, like how is it that like they reach such like static conclusions or seem to not really be able to go anywhere with it versus when we use Du Bois to make assessments of those, we don't end up at a place where we say, oh, this is all a catastrophe. Right. We don't say this is all, fascism, this is all settler colony, just re-emerging itself, We actually say something really pretty unusual, but pretty complex, but also more reflective of how we see human possibilities for revolutionary and democratic movements. I feel like I just want to say that because I just want to connect all the dots here because maybe some people might be looking or listening upon this conversation and be like, why are they so obsessed with like 2s and 3s? But there's something about what you're saying in terms of
1s and 3s.
1s and 3s.
I'm sorry.
And zeros. And zeros. And like basically, why is it that actually getting a logic right and actually understanding the purpose of like whether it's logic or even ideology or even just this scientific method of understanding history, understanding human relationships, understanding where is it possible to change ideological human relationships for greater capacities for altering the destiny and actually giving the people a chance versus all of the, because I can remember when I first started listening to Preschool, when you guys went on to Facebook for the first time and live streaming, one thing that you had said that really did change the way, and I think we were talking about dialectics that I never forgot, was that I think you mentioned that I'm predisposed, you said you were predisposed to logics and methods and dynamic ways of looking at history because it gives people a chance that there are ways in which this can all be shifted, not just through quantitative but also qualitative means, different alliances, different But then you said that the ruling class is predisposed to innate, static, stable ways of looking at things and keeping it that way and kind of pulling people back towards like, no, like the way you see things are now, that's always going to be how it is. Like that gives them an upper hand because they get to sit in the status quo and maintain essentially their position of hegemony and, you know, really lower the, you know, horizon for which, you know, human beings and like ordinary people are able to actually take up these ideas and make more complex or new configurations towards, you know, revolution movements. And I just wanted to say all that because I think this is why, like our conversation about whether it's knowledge or science or logic, theory or consciousness is tied to a revolutionary purpose. And it isn't just that we're just some, I don't know, philosophical reading, like, you know, study group at a university, just interested in working these out. These are, you know, very concrete. I'm saying it mostly for myself to kind of reaffirm our purpose and to say that there are things that we're continuing to investigate, even though we've been reading Du Bois and studying Du Bois for decades now. But last thing I'll say, and then in a point where you want to speak, is just like, I appreciated just the biographical sketches you outlined of Cornell and Gerald Horne because one is that like basically these are two people that do have quite an outsized like resonance, not in like the public intellectual realm, but also among Black folk. And people do want to look to someone like Cornell to provide some kind of way of like, you know, representing, you know, the Black prophetic tradition and legacy of, you know, philosophy and theology in service of, and even like, as you're saying, the music and the interdisciplinary, you know, bodies of knowledge that should be accessible to people, especially Black folk. But there are ways in which we still find that what he is saying, and there's some areas, especially because if you can drill down to this area of logic, like, it is a little inadequate. It is getting some things right, but it's not able to get everything right. And then we could really make, you know, even stronger case for Gerald Horne. But even just this idea of like, who is the scientist that produces this knowledge? How are they situated among the people? Like, I appreciated you saying what you said about his time at Harvard, which is where like elements of the ruling elite needed Black intellectuals in that decade in the 80s after King's assassination to actually speak like they spoke and break that tradition with with Black colleges producing actual organic and Black intellectuals actually connected to the people. And I mean, Gerald Horne makes his own case for just being such a compelling figure that maybe we don't have to go.
So Gerald Horne does what?
He's a very uncompelling figure for a lot of people, but I still think it's worth saying because some people still do gravitate towards him. And we're not just saying this because we like hating on people. Where there's just stakes, human stakes to all of this that I just wanted to put back on the table, and like why the social scientist has to be tied to the people like a Du Bois.
Yes.
Well, you should say something. You were saying it earlier.
Oh, okay. No, I just wanted to say that I've been thinking about, this thing that Du Bois says, where he says that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And this is, I've been trying to think about where to put this in the three or the one, or however, how do we think about this? And when Eddie brought up the thesis and the antithesis and the synthesis, I was thinking, well, I would probably say that this was Du Bois' thesis. Like, this was, in Socratic terms, I guess this would be a proposal or a foundation. This is what he's proposing. And then the dialectics or the trilectics would be built around this proposal. And I think that Du Bois needed this third point, I would say, to add dimension. Like, I was thinking about it in terms of a dimension. Like you have 1 point, you can define a dot. You have 2 points, you can define a line. And you have 3 points, you can define a plane. And that every single point adds dimension. And
now I don't understand what I was talking about.
Yeah, so I was trying to.
I'm only playing.
No, well, the reason why is that I was thinking about Dark Water, and where Du Bois kind of makes this argument for democracy, and there he sort of has to criticize Marx and says that, you know, when the whole Marxist revolution happened in Europe, they had like this chance to introduce the world to true democracy, but they didn't. They didn't, and it devolved into a kind of syndicalism that the United States is now facing as well. And I think that his rejection, not rejection, but dissatisfaction with Marx and his theory led him to say that, you know what, I have to start from the three now. I have to start from not the one and the dialectics. I have to start anew. And I think I can see a lot of that in what Cornel West tries to do, because he says that, oh, he's read Marx, he calls himself a Marxist, but then his thesis was on the ethical dimension of Marx, you know. So he's trying. He's also trying to add a kind of dimension which is naturally not present in Marxist analysis.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that interview kind of made me realize two things. One is that Du Bois has tried and failed to do what, Cornel West has tried and failed to do what Du Bois did a long time ago. And I think his, because he doesn't know Du Bois that well, he cannot answer certain questions about the world right now. I think that when Jyotish asked him the question about religion, he said, okay, do you think that what role does religion play in your life? How is it and everything? Cornell responds and says, well, I think that religion lacks the analytical tools to study certain social scientific things.
I think he said natural science.
Natural sciences, social sciences. So he was like, okay, we have to bring in the social scientific in order to analyze a more sociological thing. And I think that Du Bois already did that.
But he said religion occupies a place in knowledge when it comes to ethics.
Yes, yes. He said that, you know, how do people survive? How do people persevere? Religion serves a certain role in that, in the consciousness of people, but it lacks analytical tools. But I think that I would say that, like you said, he doesn't mention King a lot, but I think that King has managed to kind of get religion and sociology almost together and analyze the community through that lens. You know, there is a kind of, now I'm trying to think about dialectics, and I feel like he was able to dialectically explain religion and logic in terms of in how to study people in communities.
You're talking about Du Bois.
I'm talking about King, actually.
Oh, King. I'm sorry. Forgive me,
Sorry.
please.
And I think that I had one other thing to say, which is that, you know how they were trying to discuss the limitations of the rational framework towards the end of that interview?
Which one? Jyotish?
Yeah.
And Cornell?
Yeah. Yeah, it was towards the end where they were trying to say, oh, do you think that Marxism is adequate to analyze art? And I think Cornell's response was, and this entire conversation made me think a lot about particularly this part, where Cornell's response was that, no, in the end, Marxism is inadequate to explain things like art and music, because there is that element of the human being and their emotions and how they feel, and that's unpredictable, and that's oftentimes not rational, right? And he says no one theory can do this. But I think we in the free school, when we discuss Du Bois and we discuss law and chance, I think we do kind of get to the essence of that, right? We're trying to dialectically kind of explain how human beings behave, both scientifically sometimes and irrationally, how they take into consideration what is moral and ethical, but then also there's always that probability of chance that something new will emerge, and they're not bound by laws, and that's why he I think Cornell kind of says that I base my entire ethics on freedom, right? Because the Black freedom movement is central to producing me. Yeah, I was thinking.
Well, just because I noticed that part of the conversation too, and the funny thing is that neither Jyotish nor Cornell would ask the question, well, what social science would explain Black religion? Which is one of the questions that we're concerned with. Like what social science would explain the phenomenon of Black gods? And this is one of the projects that we're involved in. But another way of flipping it is like Du Bois ultimately tends to deploy art. He deploys artistic illustrations, renderings, stories, almost archetypes, fables, poetry, in order to best capture or explain the social reality. And the examples that came up for me were the chapter of Work and Wealth in Dark Water, and then the specific part of Black Reconstruction. But in Work and Wealth, Du Bois, he's like, basically he does the beginning of Black Reconstruction, but in miniature in the city of St. Louis. And he's like 3 men arrived in the city. And he's like, the first man is, but it's like, I can't really do justice to it because the way, it's all he just like describes like, oh, this one was the capitalist and this one was, but it's like, he imbues them with like all of these personalities.
That's right.
Like these, and
there's 3, right?
And there's 3 of them. Because like, and so you can tell that he had already started to think, because this was in the 1910s. So he started to think through stuff even before he writes Black Reconstruction. But it's like, the way that he does it is, it's almost like he's setting a stage, and then he's introduces these 3 characters into it. And actually, at one point, he's like the stage. He said the stage was set for this great tragedy. And it's like, but the other thing too is that Du Bois doesn't make what happens in East St. Louis, which is ultimately a massacre of Black people. He doesn't make it this kind of inevitable thing, but he does identify like, in this problem of problems, like there are kind of logical questions. There are kind of normal questions, he's like, of economic development, of labor, of how will the world feed itself? Where will you meet the demand for workers and for labor? Like he's like, these are the kind of natural problems of the world, and a world that is rising, and a modern world that is changing, and which has new demands because of the new, basically, emergence of like market, like all that stuff. So he can do it, but then it's like, but then for him, the crux is like the greatest problem that has presented itself in the midst of this drama is, can man be man? Can man be recognized as man? And the other example that came to mind was from Black Reconstruction, where he's like, I forget, let me look up what chapter it is. I think it's in, it's in the White Worker chapter. And he's like, in America, the stage was set for like something which was essentially the normal European logic of development of this great battle between the worker, the capitalist, the achievement of a new democracy. And he's like, and then he says, some unjust God leaned laughing over the ramparts of heaven and dropped a Black man in their midst. And so it's like, on the one hand, it's like there's like an element of fate in it, but then there's also this great element of like of chance, of activity, of agency, of something which was not the expected. And so a lot of the drama of Black Reconstruction itself is like, this black man who's been dropped into the midst of this otherwise normal, an otherwise normal development of a country.
European society.
Right. Yeah. And so I just wanted to bring those up as like, you have to get a feel for that texture of Du Bois' thinking, that sense of the dramatic, which is ultimately what Du Bois, he pulls from that in order to help him best like give you a picture of what America is going through, how it's changing, and all that. And the other thing I want to bring up is actually one of the only examples that I can remember of Du Bois referencing evolution was in John Brown, where he, at the end of the book, he says, I don't know, Blaise, you can correct me. He's like, what the theory of Darwin and evolution has done is not to, he's like, it's not about introducing a teleology of human development. Actually, he's like, what the concept of evolution in biology has done is to introduce the concept of almost like infinite possibility, infinite development. And this is where, like the immortal child. Yeah, basically, like he's kind of bringing that together with his concept of immortal child. And so Du Bois does have a relationship with the natural sciences, with the natural world, but it's not in the way that was deployed basically in like the science of that day. And actually, like, you even see traces of it with, there's this essay that Thomas Friedman wrote in the New York Times recently. He was like, what term would we use to describe this epoch of human history? And he's trying to go through possible answers. Like, some people use the Anthropocene, a lot of academics use that concept, the age of man, basically. Other people use this idea of like a post-Cold War, but maybe we're in a post-Cold War. And then so what Friedman arrives at is this new term of a Polyscene, which he also gets from the idea of polycrisis from Adam Tooze. But anyways, but the interesting thing I found about the essay was that Friedman, he deploys this very, I guess you could say positivistic framework, where he's like, humankind goes through what he calls phase changes. Basically like a gas, like a liquid turning into gas, which is like, actually, I don't know if Didi Kusami uses it.
Yeah.
Kusami might use a similar concept. Anyways, but I was just thinking about it because it's like, there is a lot of that, still that current of thinking among sections of the ruling elite, where it's like, you have to deploy these like natural science categories and frameworks of thought in order to legitimate a social theory or legitimate a theory of history.
Right.
And ultimately, like, that is an approach that Du Bois, that's not his primary mode of thinking, even if he's engaging with the natural sciences.
Can I ask you just a quick question? What did Friedman, what was he saying this age is? I saw the essay, but
he calls it the Polyscene.
The polythene.
Scene. So not the Anthropocene, but the
age of many things.
The age of many things. Oh. So he's trying to basically be like, okay,
diversity.
So you have, because he was like, it's not just the age of AI, it's not just the age of the multipolar world, it's not just the age of whatever, democracy failing and all that stuff. But he's like, you have the convergence of a
abundance.
Actually, he uses the term polymorphism, actually, which reminded me of that essay that you in the 2000s. As you were trying to also make sense of basically what is the Du Boisian way of understanding. Because I think that, if I'm not wrong, like you were trying to experiment with this idea of polymorphism to also capture maybe something which would be more resonant with like quantum theory, which is like, how can a thing occupy multiple positions at one time?
That's right.
Which is also the concept of quantum computing, which is like you have a qubit which can occupy both positions of ones and zeros simultaneously, which is also what
that's that other
which opens up new possibilities for computing itself. But
where things are not opposites, they occupy the same.
Right.
Well, what do you call that in physics? When
superposition.
Superposition?
Yes.
That's
true.
Okay.
I mean, that's the whole underlying basis of quantum mechanics, is that things exist in superposition.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But I just wanted to add to what Jeremiah is saying, because I think you helped me. Like, the thing that I was trying to say, that there can't be one-to-one mapping between like physics and biology and sociology. It is that thing of what Du Bois brings in is not quantitative differences, but qualitative differences, which have to do with, you know, like more the things that we were talking about, consciousness, agency, you know, which create qualitatively new possibilities instead of things that you can quantitatively say is different. I mean, I even think this policy and all of this is still stuck in that realm of trying to quantitatively describe differences between a past moment and this moment. And yeah, I think the other stuff I wanted to say was very much in line with what Shantanu was saying, because I mean, there is a distinction between Gerald Horne and Cornel West, where in the Cornel West interview, in a lot of it, I was like, oh wow, I can totally be down with this, because like a lot of people have said, he starts with freedom.
Not justice. That was
not justice. And then he says, I come out of the Black freedom struggle. This is why my thinking is different. And even in his critique of Zoran, where he says that, oh, when you say New York was built by immigrants, you gotta check yourself. That's not right. You know? So in some ways, he does seem to have that third category, or not the third category in terms of it comes third in order, but that third dimension of the Black worker or the Black poor as being something that you cannot lump together with other things, but have to deal with.
That's right. I agree with that.
But then my question was, why then can't he go forward?
Because he doesn't have a logic.
I see. Like, I think it's also because it's so easy for him to then default to, again, the duality of like the ruling class dual construct of fascism versus lack of or the absence of fascism. I don't know how all of this it just seemed like everything he was saying, there were so many contradictions, because on one hand, he does seem to have this centrality of the Black historical experience or historical constitution. But then you're also talking about how the rise of neo-fascism makes something difficult right now.
I feel like my sense is for Cornell, I don't feel like his priority is like total coherence. In that sense.
You might be right.
Like, I think, and because a lot of his mode, his style is like, let me pluck all these different things that I've absorbed over the years. And he's like, I'm gonna move here, but then I'm gonna because that's him also trying to be, you know, the jazz thing, the blues,
a blues sensibility, and a jazz
improvisation,
improvisation.
Yeah. So I don't think he's trying to be totally consistent.
Oh, he's in the super.
Yeah, he's a super.
But I don't think, you know, sometimes you forget how you could do that. And after a long career of speaking, you know, he stopped writing books, which I give him credit for, because that is a mind-numbing process too. But I don't think he even remembers of how that might be done from his own learning. And then again, he hasn't read Du Bois enough to think about other intellectual options.
The one last thing I wanted to bring up from that interview, which was clarifying for me in understanding Cornell's, like, you know, philosophical standing is, you know, Jyotish asked this question, and I thought it was a very sneaky question. I was not happy with it at all, because it's a leading question where he's asking Cornell to basically say that the Black radical tradition
is dead.
You know?
And Horne had said that in an interview with Jyotish.
I see. I didn't have the courage to listen to it. But he asks that question, and it was disappointing to find Cornel West's response to it to be weak, because he agrees with that. And the way he justifies it is to say that, oh, all of the leaders were, and who he considers leaders are not necessarily who we would consider leaders of the Black radical tradition. Where he says, oh, you know, they attacked the leaders, they assassinated leaders, incarcerated leaders. And then Barack Obama was made into like the spokesperson for Black people. So yeah, the Black freedom tradition is weak or dead. But then the question I had was, who does he see the Black tradition or the philosophy, the vision, the worldview who does he see it existing in? Or how does what do we mean when we say the Black radical tradition exists versus not?
But let me ask you this, why doesn't he see what we see?
Right.
Why is it so natural for us to see the world the way we do? But like with Cornell, you almost there and then you don't get, so why can't he get there?
Yeah, but I think it has something to do with what we have been talking about in seeing these institutions like the United House of Prayer. You know, like the tradition, the consciousness, if it lives among the poor. It lives among the people, first of all. And I think he sort of still is that, I mean, that idea of the public intellectual to be the ones who carry forward the legacy of a radical tradition and so on. And the existence or non-existence of the Black radical tradition, depending on the existence or non-existence of the Black.
And you know, I want to stop, in my own thing, I want to stop using, I've decided, the Black radical tradition, because that comes out of, what's his name, Black Marxism.
Cedric Robinson?
Frederick Robinson. Cedric Robinson. You know, and he sets it up in such a superficial way.
No, but that's
Fanon, Du Bois, and C.L.R. James. But that's bullshit. I see, because then when you talk about, see what they're talking about, what Horne and Cornell are talking, well, Cornell is talking, Cornell is talking about something he doesn't know that much about. So they think that McCarthyism and taking Du Bois and Robeson down, well, that ended the Black radical tradition. Well, I don't have any evidence of that.
Right.
I mean, we took losses, but it was not a defeat, because right after that, you had the rise of the Montgomery bus boycott. And so what, I mean, all right, it would have been, if we had Robeson out there, it would have been stronger, you know? But see, they don't see King as a radical.
Right, because I feel like it gets actually to one of those questions that Nandita had asked during the Knowledge Symposium, which is not where is the Black radical tradition, but where is King and the consciousness of the American people?
Wow.
It's a much more interesting and open-ended question.
That's right.
Which would actually require investigation.
Scientific.
And going among the people. And the thing that I found striking about Cornell was even the way that he talked about like his critique of Zoran was like, he was like, oh, Zoran like did something with the police or something. Or like, and I feel like it's fine, but I don't think that that's the reason why like Black people are not into Zoran. It's not just about the policing thing. And the hunch I got from that was like Cornell, well, I guess this is a question I had for you, was how much do you think Cornell has been ideologically and epistemologically shaped by moving so much within like activist circles,
I think
like left circles?
I think moving within academic and left circles or activist circles, which tend to be more public intellectuals, college educated people. I think that does affect him, and I think he has a desire to be applauded and celebrated. I saw that more in this interview than before, because he kept talking about himself. I went to jail with Carl Dix.
My presidential campaign.
So, I thought that represented to me, and I could be wrong, his having thrown in the towel. He has thought the best thoughts that he has presented them. The best ideas that he has presented them. And he doesn't have the energy, which I find extreme. They get to this energy. I mean, I'm years old. I should be. When's somebody gonna bring my walker out, man? No, but I find that difficult because, just the way we do, because there's something to be known.
Right.
But when you take Horne and Cornell, it's no more to be known. Every essential thing that is we already know. We know this is fascism. We know this is a settler colony. We know that the white masses will only be counter-revolutionary. We know. So what else is there to do? But just repeat over and over and over again. And I felt he was better at UP when I know you were really dissatisfied with him than he was in this interview. If you don't, you know.
Well, the one thing that I would say that I did agree with Cornell in terms of his criticism about Zoran, apart from Zoran not being very integrated with the black community.
He don't know a damn thing.
Yeah, Cornell said,
and then gonna try to be a gatekeeper.
Yeah, Cornell was saying that, do you wonder why the black community doesn't break dance for you? I was
break but they don't break dance. I thought that was a little bit. I mean, at least I would say something, you know, twerk for you.
But I did like the fact that he said that I don't really even consider Zoran a socialist, because socialism has to be tied with the battle against white supremacy, and I don't see that in his campaign. And I was like, yeah, that's something that I would personally agree with. Anything, if I consider the world communist movement as anything, I would say it's a battle against. It has to be inherently a battle against white supremacy.
I wish he had said that as clearly, but I think he doesn't. I think he said it's the battle against monopoly capital.
Well, he did say that to break up the monopolies like Eugene did, and all that's good. But don't put that on one man running for mayor.
Right.
I mean, when he gonna break up the monopolies, take over Wall Street, nationalize the banks in his first 90 days, 100 days, and then from there be flipped. Say that again.
Dictatorship.
Yeah. And for the rest of the time, the rest of his 3 years, he'd be fleeing not to be killed, be underground.
Can I, no, one last thing, just to finish the thought, because I feel like what you were saying about the black radical tradition being, in some ways, we can leave it behind, that formulation of the black.
I mean, just for me, I don't.
No, but it actually reminded me of, say, when we did the Henry Winston conference in 2023, and you highlighted that there are three aspects to Winston's thinking, that triad of the scientific rational, which is Marxism, Leninism, the second being the black proletarian imaginary, and the third being this moral revolutionary imperative. I think that's a very important taking forward of what language to even use, where the black proletarian imaginary qualitatively describes something more than what the black radical tradition can anymore. And you search for it in the people, you search for it in the institutions of the people, instead of in the intellectuals who came to speak for the people. And even all of this, even Cornell had that thing of, Zoran has the settler mentality. It's become so common to. But then if you look at Winston, he has such a strong critique of this colony theory, where he's like, you cannot think of Black America as a colony because the colonies in Africa, the colonized form the majority, and their struggle is for national liberation. It is not the same struggle for Black people in this country. And then, anyway, I just bring that up to say that Winston, coming from a Black proletarian imaginary or being rooted in that imaginary, explains something more than these people trying to talk about, the Black radical tradition used to exist, now dead, and that's why things are not moving forward. But anyway.
I just have one small thing to add, which is, I know that Cornell kind of, he says it a lot, that I'm a blues man, I'm a jazz man, and I don't doubt it.
Remember he brought up the Shy Lights? For God's sake, we got to give more power to the people. Which was an interesting move, because he referenced all of these songs that talk about the people, ordinary people, power to the people. I felt that was...
Yeah, but I think that he kind of takes the blues as something that tells him that, and he mentions this in the interview, that the blues tells me to never deny catastrophe. That anything that comes we face it, right? But I think that he understands, and criticizing Cornel West, but I think he understands blues and jazz like the half of it. He understands 50% of it, because blues was supposed to also be about hope and resilience and humanity, not just about facing hardships, and that's where when I was hearing that part of the interview, I was like, where is your concept of the sky? Because when I hear the blues, when I hear all of these people that he talks about, like Duke Ellington and Nina Simone and all of these people, they are really artistically expressing the sorrows and hardships of Black people, but they're also, the Baldwin is also speaking through them as in the way that this has to lead to something, lead to a revolutionary transformation of people, and there will be a day when things that America becomes the last white nation.
Can I just say, like some people have brought it up before about the synthesis and Black Reconstruction, but this conversation today has made me sort of rethink Black Reconstruction because, obviously we're talking about a science for today, but Du Bois in Black Reconstruction describes the process where the existing order collapsed and the new one confronted everyone, all the three, with new questions and with a new, in the preschool we've called it before, with a new task, with a new imperative. And one thing I liked from the Cornel West speech was his criticism of Zoran Mamdani, because he said, people need to think about socialism more than just free buses, free healthcare. And that's been the critique. And even though, Cornel said it, but did he understand it? Because you also, there's not really much to say because everything's been said, but you brought up your article, Short History of Propaganda, where you begin by comparing Cornel West and Molefe Asante, but at the end of the day, they end up at the same place, which is propped up by the white establishment. And that's why it's so necessary for new ideas for this time. And I was confused. I understand the one and then the negation, and then but we didn't talk about one prime, and in an understanding of threes, would there be a 1, 2, and 3 prime, or would it be 1 prime and the rest are left behind? So I don't know. I don't even understand how to approach the question. So I thought I'd just lay it on the table.
It's a derivative.
I don't know anybody here who really does a lot of mathematics except you, Eddie.
No.
You do mathematics?
Everybody.
Because, mathematics, geometry and arithmetic in particular are fields of mathematics that help to work out some of these relationships. Actually, geometry is the mathematics of relationships, and arithmetic is the mathematics of addition, adding,
Can I ask a question? I think this was from the very beginning of your remarks, and I flagged it, but I forgot. You made a distinction between
sorry, I think I had the same thing.
Cornel West leaning more towards the ethical than the moral. Can you say a little bit more about what that is?
The ethical and the moral
versus like what is the
I think you're comparing with the morality coming out of the European rationalist, how Kant would talk about the categorical or moral.
But if that's not ethics, what is it?
What was that?
We could also not talk about this.
If morality isn't ethics, then what is ethics?
Yeah,
Isn't
this is
ethics
very
like law
important.
more than it is like
Ethics is like, it's like the right practice.
Like rules and practice, right?
Say what?
Like ethics is like rules and practice. Or
I think that's what ethics is.
yeah, like
But it has some-
pragmatic sort of concrete diagnosis, as opposed to
ethics-
Kant, like the moral imperative of like what is
Yeah.
actually right.
Yeah.
Well, ethics assumes morality.
That's
Ethics
what
is
I
I
want-
think.
I wanted to, I was thinking, I mean, I'm also a little stuck in the initial part of the continued logic, because I think, this question of ethics and moral, I think this is like when you were talking about this, I think this has something to do with the question of logic of, the twos and threes, because I feel like
One and three.
Sure, of one and threes, because I think there is a way of talking about morality that comes out of the British empiricist tradition, and I think it's more familiar in terms of Victorian morality and so on, where you see morality as the opposite of immorality. And I think what we are trying to, what comes out of the Bois and what we are trying to, what we mean by when we talk about the moral choice, it's not simply about being ethical or as the opposite of being unethical, because we are trying to talk about the possibility of human beings, generating and rising towards and creating new moral standards. And I don't think this is a simplistic question of being moral and immoral, because honestly, that's the kind of formulation that lets you to to conclude that the world is made up of racists and anti-racists, or you have revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries, but I think this is what everybody has been saying, but I'm also trying to make sense of it now, that the possibility of human beings making the moral choice at every step.
See, that's the whole thing.
This is where
the ethical.
because I think what you were saying, or how I was trying to make sense of the question of the ethics and the moral imperative is not so much to be able to identify the categories in which you can divide, in which you can pigeonhole either human beings or ideas and so on. But basically what we're trying to say is that there are possibilities that come out, there are new possibilities that come out, which has been actually the whole process of history, moving forward, where we never history has not moved forward by simply oscillating between the good and the bad, the good and the evil, not oscillating between the racist and the anti-racist and so on, but it's really to create new moral standards. And this is precisely what King is saying when he says that it is not enough to be a moral individual in yourself. It is not enough. But he's saying that the world is too complex. The world is so complex that you can be an ethical individual and still not play a role in changing the world, in being a revolutionary. And I think this is where I think we are also trying to contend with the question of what it means to be revolutionary. And this question of logic, I think Serafina, that's what you were asking with. The purpose of logic is also, I think we're trying to figure out how does it inform us, how does it help us, how does it inform us to know what is the revolutionary task, what does it mean to be revolutionary. And I think, this question of the, constantly growing moral standards and the moral imperative, that's what it comes to, that's what I was thinking of, that this is a consequence of what we're trying to do in terms of logic, experimenting, with threes, like you were saying, like 3 being the minimum, I guess Purva was saying, 3 being the minimum, that lets you that lets you come up with new answers, that lets you come up with new thought.
Because it's like, ultimately, even if we're considering the 3s, the 1s, the 2s, and you could say, oh, maybe what we're after is for this 3 to become 1, for example. I think all of it is really in service of, or should be in service of, we want to change human beings. Like we want to change relationships between human beings. And I feel like that is like the ultimate purpose of any of it, beyond like however fascinating it is to consider.
But I think one thing is for certain, to look at the world in terms of threes rather than one is it assists in creative and critical thinking. That's what, and I think in part that's what we're searching for. That's what we're trying to develop. Whether or not a historical logic in threes really gets at it, we don't. But I think think about what would happen if we were on the one.
Okay.
Just on the one and zero. Suppose we were locked in there. Could we explain? Will we even be here? We'd be home sleeping or just chilling, because there's nowhere to go with it. You might. Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead.
It just what you were saying reminded me of Freaks and the American Ideal of Manhood. Freaks and the American Ideal of Manhood, where Baldwin ends up at a different kind of answer to the complexity of like gender and sexuality than the identity politics evoke, where he's not saying that it's just man and woman and there's nothing else. He's saying it is complex, but in trying to explain that complexity, you're making more categories. You're just making more boxes to fit people in, and that is not the way to deal with complexity. Complexity is to know that every human being has in themselves both the man and the woman, or something like that. So just a fundamentally different approach to study human beings and the human condition.
Just on the moral ethical thing, Kant uses the moral imperative. He doesn't use the ethical imperative. But Sartre, 100 years later maybe, comes up with, he writes in Being and Nothingness, which was a study of ethical choices. And I would say that Sartre's study of choices is a study of ethics, and that people ultimately choose to be or not to be.
Right.
To be human or not to be at all.
Right. That's interesting. The one and the zero.
That's kind of similar to what King said. It kind of is like what King said about it's either collective annihilation or what's the
non-violence or non-existence.
Well, I mean,
and that's a very good point, because it then throws all of this back on humanity. And that is, even we could go round and round with logical questions, but it still doesn't get us to the question of the moral or ethical imperative, and what will human beings do, and how do they understand their responsibility.
This is true.
But I think, Nuri, I agree with you that I'm just not certain. Do you look at ideology as an externality or something inherent to the triad,
I feel like I'm leaning towards it being part of. Because I feel like if it's an externality, it feels more, I guess, because Marxism takes Hegel, but it's dialectical materialism, right? And I feel like there are things that are gained, but then Marxism treats ideology, well, actually, no, it doesn't externalize ideology either, right?
I think for Marxism, that's kind of the way you look at it. Ideology is, in one way, an externality. Even you get it from Lenin when he says that the Communist Party, the vanguard of the working class, brings consciousness to the working class, which means it comes from outside. I don't know how subtle the issue that is in Marxism at all.
Because initially I wanted to say that Marxism does treat ideology as an external thing because of what you were saying, but then it was because I was remembering like your analytical Marxism stuff and how basically
analytical Marxism seeks to even externalize the ideology of Marxism, like from Marxism.
Oh yeah.
Right? Where like even like this thing of like class conflict being the fundamental like driving force of Marxism itself or of like history. Like analytical Marxism seeks to like identify like a working class or like capitalism, but to not even view it as an ideological or a class conflict.
Because it also, when you had written that essay, it was like they were rejecting dialectics altogether.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, like taking the dialect. Because I feel like basically I think what we're saying maybe also is that like the logic is like it's a way of thinking, and fundamentally like what we're pursuing is a logic that is useful, that can actually be of use in the world, and especially in like figuring out social relations, like the revolutionary process in America, the freeing of humanity. But then the logics is also like ideological, basically. Like there is an ideological conflict. Like even this thing of like if the ruling class is invested in a certain logic that is not even logical, but promotes it as a logic because it's static or because it is trying to like basically enslave human beings and like constrain human thought, then if we're seeking like a logic of freedom, not only is it truthful, but it also does have an ideological like substance to it.
Maybe a future question is I guess how you think about logic versus structure. I feel like you invoke the idea of structure. I'm trying to go into the structures of your own thinking.
Well, the question of structure, we get from a sociological standpoint, structures are concrete, social institutions, social relationships. From the standpoint of philosophy, Kant would be considered a structuralist in that he begins from the point of view of the rational conditions of thought, of thinking, of science, actually. And so that is when philosophers, or at least certain philosophers, when they get into the whole thing of a structuralist, what they're talking about is the study of deep and decisive, I guess I would say, assumptions, the deepest assumptions that make reason possible. That's Kant. He's definitely a structuralist. Then you will get some who try to do a synthesis of structure, that is Kantianism, and agency. And this is this Marxist thinker called Louis Althusser, a French person. He's considered a structuralist. And a lot of times people who do anthropology are considered structuralists. But whenever you see a structuralist, I don't say run for the hills, but just know a structuralist is trying to examine the laws, the assumptions that we're operating upon. So do you have any?
Okay, so I will read comments. Fireplay says, good morning. M. Sparks says, good morning. David Ball says, Professor, you're absolutely correct and nailed the contradictions in Horne.
Say that again.
You're absolutely correct and you've nailed Gerald Horne's contradictions. Gerald Horne didn't like how the bourgeois revolution played out, but it was still a revolution. There is a reason why the Union Jack doesn't fly over the Capitol. Socioeconomic formations are not delivered by counter-revolution. I think he's saying Gerald Horne needed to talk to Nkrumah.
Is what?
Gerald Horne needed to talk to Nkrumah. And Kwame Nkrumah. And then I'm glad Cornell is not ideologically wrecked up like Eric Dyson. Elitist ideological formations are coterminous to capitalism, and splits consciousness into three ? And then I think David Ball is feeling the primes, A over B prime, where A and B are vertical and B and B prime are horizontal. I'm gonna need to think about that because I think it gets into the geometries. But
Yeah, right.
that's where the collusion with A emerges, which is bourgeois consciousness. And then M. Sparks was like, okay, that's another way to describe this. But then he was just kind of like, okay, I don't know. It's a little bit more complex and nuanced, but that's a good start, David. And then David says, I try. Michelle Bell had a fish orange wide eye emoji, and then says, free school is too rich for my blood today. Archives are important. How could one thoroughly study history without primary sources? And then M. Sparks, this is my favorite comment of his today. Democrats, aka Blue Klux Klan. And then David Ball says, affirmative, M. Sparks, no argument for me. And then, let's see. And then Walter had commented, are Africans spelled with a K invited to the Saturday free school? We never see the Africans in the class.
No, that's right. I want the Africans in the class, but the Africans gotta come.
But yeah, the free school is open to all.
Yes.
And let's see, last set of comments from David Ball. He says, well, in 1973, we attempted to incorporate Du Bois into the curriculum at the College of New Jersey. It got the professor fired.
Which professor?
Yeah, we would like to know which professor. But, yeah, we actually had a lot of viewers today.
A lot of what?
We had a lot of viewers today, but it seems like the comment section was relatively restricted.
Because we were
a
So I think we had a lot of viewers.
Oh, viewers.
People were watching and absorbing.
The name of our live stream sometimes.
We have hot button topics.
But more quiet lurkers today.
Do you guys want to do? Oh, okay. So we just want to give another update and announcement on the events that we're doing at the Lucas Blackwell Library at 52nd Street. We have a great new flyer. Thanks to Jeremiah.
Flyer,
and actually, a question, something that Emily asked, and maybe if you could print another round, maybe you could add like the artwork credit because I think the story of how you found this is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it's by an artist named Frank Waltz who did artwork for The Crisis and a few other. I think he did stuff for like The Masses magazine.
Like Masses and Mainstream.
Yeah, and it was for the October 1919 issue of The Crisis, which was one of the yearly children's issues of The Crisis, which was dedicated to children.
And it came out around a similar time that Du Bois' Dark Water, the book that we have been reading for the past 3 months at the Lucas Blackwell Library, was published. Like that was published in 1920. So that is now approved by the library. Our partner there, Barbara, has been able to, reserve the space and allow us to go forward with that program, in which, yes, it is on Tuesday, November 25th, 4:30 to 6:30, but doors open actually at 4 p.m. because we just feel that as we're solidifying the program and making additional adjustments to the program, we do feel strongly there are certain things that we do want to happen, that things that do need to be said, such as, inviting our reading group members to read aloud some of those moving passages that really spark so much discussion, so much even debate, or even like eventually a lot of consolidation around what really is, as we're saying, that revolutionary application of Du Bois to this time of crisis, which we talk quite a bit about. Obviously, even today's conversation about even numerology, but actually really about logics came out of even some of our conversations there. But we talk about a lot more things than that too. Also, like the question of even education of Black children in the city, the question of like democracy, the question of what it means to actually find a revolutionary path towards a unified people's movement. All these things come up in our discussion in very new and creative ways. And so we just want to invite everybody to celebrate the year of reading together, and that encompasses also even when we're reading James Baldwin and King, starting from November 2024 at the Lucian Blackwell Library, and just, you know, end the year, not with a whimper, but a bang, as you said once. And I don't know what else is there to say at the moment, but just to make sure you mark your calendars and that it's going to be a beautiful program to look forward to. And yeah, more details to come.
Okay, I think it's time to.
We hope you enjoyed the beginning of our working outs of Trilectic. And there will be more of that.
And we'll keep doing it. Back.
Bye.
Bye.